Hello and welcome to the Australian Roundtable Podcast on Sunday the 17th of May 2015. This is episode 32. I'm your host John Bond and I'm joined in the studio today by Ethan Nash of TOTT News. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here, Johnno.
And we're also fortunate enough to again have with us via Google Hangout our resident wise old elder, the silver fox himself, Lindsay. Thanks for being there.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm here. I'm really pleased to be here today.
Terrific. Well, I'll just read out this blurb as always. For new listeners, the ARP is a Brisbane-based independent news analysis discussion roundtable which broadcasts live every Sunday from around 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Live listeners can take part in the live chat forum at the YouTube channel during broadcasts, and there's plenty of people in the live chat right now. Good to see all of you people there. All episodes are archived at that YouTube channel and are also available to download in MP3 format from our website at ausroundtable.com. The views presented by individual panelists and guests are not necessarily representative of the entire panel, and all important information cited during the broadcast will be linked to at our website, ausroundtable.com, so you can verify it and analyse it for yourself, which we always recommend you do. Episodes generally run for about 2 hours, and although it's a roundtable discussion, we do keep to a rough structure for each episode, generally breaking up into domestic and international. Now, for the domestic segment today, we've got a packed agenda. We've got 8 topics. I'll go through them briefly right now. We've got another medical breakthrough, new biosecurity laws, nurse has been banned for their arms cache, I think is how you pronounce that one. The US Consulate warning of imminent terror here in Australia. The Marxist ABC is getting even nuttier. Yeah, I've really ordered this poorly, and I'm using a pencil today. I can't even read my own handwriting. This is ridiculous. There is a 6th, there it is, Airport CCTV, Ethan. That's another one for today. The 7th one will be to do with the Jewish child sex abuse cover-up, which I intimated I'd do last week. And then finally, more vaccine propaganda, which will lead into international segment where we're going to discuss Mexico suspending vaccinations because of a mass amount of deaths related to that, David Cameron's war on the people continuing after his election victory, and the Vatican recognising the State of Palestine, which will get us into a general chat about who really runs the world. So it is a packed episode, and I'm looking forward to each one of these topics. But before we get into the big episode, we do like to have a general chat. And Lindsay, I haven't spoken to you in a few days, mate. How you been?
Yeah, I've been good, thanks. Yeah. We were talking about the agenda before we came on, and there's just so much stuff this week, and it's a real crack up, some of it. So I'm ready to go.
Good stuff. And Ethan, you made the trip up to Brisbane today, beautiful St. Lucia, and when you walked in the door, you didn't seem too impressed with my beautiful city, Brisbane. What's the matter, mate?
It's the belly of the beast, Johnno. It's every time I mention this most times, but today it really got on my nerves. Just the buses and the public transport, and just the mentality of the city. And for those who don't know, even in Australia, most people don't know that the Brisbane's official slogan for our city is Australia's New World City. That's what it is, and it reigns true because this is a compact city. That it's full of multiculturalism, full of compact workers, obedient workers. It was just a nightmare today, but I was glad to come behind the battle lines here, John, and ready for a good show.
Well, it's good to have you in the studio. It's a lot easier when you've got people with you rather than having to use the Hangout. But for people who can't make it, Lindsay, the Hangout is a useful option, so I'm glad that you're there with us. We better get straight into the first topic, and we always like to have a laugh at the latest psyop in the news, and this week was no exception. We've got one to do with child terror. So let me read this out. I've actually got it on my computer here, so let me see if I can find this one. This is from the Courier Mail or News, Rupert Murdoch, and it's from yesterday, May 16. It's entitled, Blonde Rugby-Loving School Captain Turns Jihadist. Well, quote, he was the archetypal blonde Aussie schoolboy with a passion for rugby league and the beach, but the school captain's dream of becoming a lawyer or doctor turns to fantasies about life as a jihadist. Oliver Bridgman's family and friends were horrified to learn he had flown to the Middle East to fight for Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group, the Al-Nusra Front, going by the name Yusuf Oli. The 18-year-old headed to Syria while pretending he was doing charity work in Asia, the Courier Mail reported. His worried parents raised the alarm after he failed to return to Queensland from Bali. Australian federal police and overseas security agencies have reportedly launched an international manhunt after discovering he travelled to Syria via Turkey, a popular route for jihadists, according to the Courier Mail. Just weeks ago, the recent high school graduate posted photos to Facebook of himself playing soccer with underprivileged Indonesian children and socialising with other... What the hell? That's it, I'm done. This, for our listeners who aren't aware, this was front page news of our only newspaper here in Brisbane yesterday. And by front page news, I mean literally it was the entire front page was a photo of this guy, and it said, "Child turns terrorist," or "This is terror," or something like that. And I had to stop dead in my tracks and just take a double look. This is actually being passed off as real news, Ethan.
Another week, another boogeyman. Last week it was the Mother's Day psyop that they tried to convince the masses were a threat, and now this week it's a blonde Aussie school captain. And what got me was, you know me, John. I always, when something like this happens, I always check the news to see what the analysis is or what they're trying to shove down our throat. And this week they just had experts talking all week, round the clock about this, and they ask, well, how do ISIS recruit these people? Oh, well, through social media, of course. Did you know of the 44,000 Twitter followers that ISIS have? About 4,000 of them tweet Allah Akbar in Arabic text. That's their justification, that they're recruiting these people through Twitter and doing ratios of the Twitter followers. And there's a guy in a suit there going, yes, well, obviously that's the main focal point we have to attack immediately is social media. You can't make this up.
There are people, I imagine, who actually believe that this is real and are actually getting scared. Like, that is obviously their agenda here, trying to scare people. But it is hard for me to relate to someone who can listen to this garbage and actually believe it. Lindsay, I'll throw that one to you.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I can think of is that blondes have more fun. Obviously, that's what he thought. So.
Well, he had supposedly told his parents he was going on the humanitarian mission, and then all of a sudden he just winds up in the middle of the desert with ISIS and they're rolling banks. He's probably rolling the bank right now. He's rolling in money.
Rolling banks in Mosul. Listen, if you're a new listener to the show, and episode 32 is the first exposure you've had to the Aussie Roundtable, you have to understand that we've been covering this since September last year, this terrorism propaganda nonsense. And I can't speak for Lindsay or for Ethan, but I can speak for myself. I think this article isn't just embellished. I suspect the whole thing might be fake. And I'll probably do a video on this one sometime soon for my channel, John Le Bon, because a lot of the photos in this article look completely fake, and we're at the point now where we were discussing this before we went to air. They could have an article saying that El Fakey Boogiemano, and they could just show photos of trees with no people in them. Like, this is the boy playing soccer as a kid or whatever. And the people are so stupid, they
believe it.
They believe it.
But the interesting thing is through my journalism experience, the Walkley Media Talk spoke about how 80% of people don't actually go and read the articles from social media. They just see the headline and then they share the articles. And I'm sure we've been guilty of doing that in the past. We've seen it and going, oh, well, that's terrible, and shared it. They could literally just fill an article full of you're an idiot, we are lying to you, and people would still share it. People would share it like crazy because they dumb us down to the point where we don't even read anymore. It's ridiculous.
And the people at home, look, I'm sure there are some people who, even though they haven't worked out that the media is completely lying to them, it's all part of the same government media propaganda arm, they'd be looking at this article going, this just doesn't seem right. But they wouldn't think to bring it up with people because you don't want to seem like you're crazy for not believing the news. But we're at the point now where if you still actually believe the news is here to help you, there's not really much hope for you. But if you're someone who likes to discuss how ridiculous the news is, you've come to the right place, and we better get into domestic right now. The first topic that we're discussing is another medical... Speaking of the media lying to us, another medical breakthrough. Lindsay, take it away.
Yeah, thanks for that. This is in the Courier Mail on the 15th of May. And the headline said, single flu jab for life on the horizon. And I'll quote, one shot flu jab for life may be on the way. Remember, may be on the way after a scientific breakthrough by an Australian-led research team. And end of quote. And that pretty much says it all. The usual breakthrough just about to happen, maybe, or in 10 years, etc. There seems to be at least one of these medical breakthrough predictions on television, at least weekly. You have a look for them yourself. This must be how the industry applies pressure to politicians for continual funding. And I'm not exaggerating. I've noticed this for over a year now. Nearly every week there's a medical breakthrough, and it's usually on all the commercial stations and on the ABC. So whoever's running it really has got the ins inside the television and the newspaper organisations. So I'll throw that back to Ethan because I'd like to see what he has to say about this.
Yeah, Lindsay, it seems like a regular thing now, and it's classic 1984 where there's a new breakthrough where the rations increase, and it's been the same the whole time, even less. They're just brainwashing the people. And that's what got me about, we spoke a couple of weeks ago about the medicinal cannabis trials coming to Queensland. and the tests and how good this would be. But on the other hand, no, we don't need tests. We've got an entire century of proven results about how this cures all of these diseases and helps, you know, the body fight off, you know, cancer and you know, some of these convulsions and whatnot that these babies are having these days, flooded with all these chemicals. The problem is we don't need tests. We don't need this. And then they always try to just keep our hopes up. Yeah, things will get better one day. They'll get better one day. There's a breakthrough. It'll come in about 4 years, the trials, and there'll be a breakthrough, and then everyone forgets about it. But in their subconscious, the hope is up, Johnno.
That's exactly what I think it is. And it reminds me of how when I first started doing the show with Lindsay, and he mentioned the fact that if you look in the newspaper, every week there'll be something about the Nazis. There'll be anti-Nazi propaganda every week if you look for it. And I thought, I'd never noticed, but now that I look for it, yeah, every week there's anti-Nazi propaganda 70 years after World War II finished. So you have to ask yourself, how come they're still demonizing the Nazis 7 years later? And it's the same with this medical breakthrough crap. If you look for it, it's there all the time, constantly. Medical breakthroughs on the horizon, And I think it's exactly like you said, to get into people's subconscious, to make them believe the future's going to be better, while all around them things are clearly getting much worse. And I've actually found this instructive. If I'm talking with someone, I try and find out pretty quickly if they think things are getting better, things are getting worse, or they're remaining roughly the same. And what I find is the more clued on people are, the more likely they are to realize that things are getting worse, and the dumber people are, the more likely they are to think that things are getting better, whether that's to do with technology, whether it's medical technology or whatever, to do with government, to do with world cohesion, whatever. The dumber someone is generally, the more likely they are to believe that things are getting better. So rather than ask them what they believe about anything, early in a conversation with someone, it's like, hey, do you think things are getting better or getting worse? And if they say, oh better, then you know, I generally don't spend too much time talking to that person. Lindsay, we need to move on to the second topic, and the second topic for today is a new biosecurity law. Ethan, take it away.
Thanks, Johnno. Now, this was a pretty big development this week. Yourself and I, Johnno, we saw it at the same time almost. John made a video about it if you want to go check that out. I've got an article at tottnews.com, my website, which I'll read out now, that I wrote earlier in the week. It's from May 14th, 2015. New Australian law allows forced vaccinations, quarantine, or jail to, quote, prevent the spread of disease. Individuals suspected of having a serious contagious disease could face 5 years in prison if they defy orders to stay at home, including the warrant of forced vaccinations, searches without a warrant, and more, according to a new legislation passed into Australian law. The Biosecurity Bill 2014, and as always, we'll leave links at AusRoundtable.com on our website, so you can go check and read the legislation for yourself. The bill cleared Parliament on Wednesday and is aimed at preventing the spread of diseases such as Ebola in human populations and agriculture, despite having no confirmed cases of outbreak in Australia. The government expects the human control orders to be seldom used, but believe they are important to manage serious communicable diseases, especially in light of the recent Ebola epidemic. And I've quoted from a section of a Guardian article that John and I discovered ourselves, where it talks about it, introduces at the source. And this is where it gets interesting. Chapter 2 of the legislative piece details control orders given to those individuals suspected of showing symptoms determined by the health minister, and restricted movements and tests required if a person is categorised under this new law. This includes limitation of movement to a secure area, and more, without being proven to have the disease at any particular moment in the process. Quote, now this is directly from the legislation. A human biosecurity control order may only be applied if an individual has signs or symptoms of a listed human disease, or if the individual has not complied with an entry requirement under the clauses. These strict limitations in the application of human biosecurity control orders ensure that measures applied relate only to the management of listed human diseases, and entry requirements are proportionate and legitimate. They are limited. Hold on, let me repeat that. These entry requirements are there as the proportionate and legitimate limitation to an individual's freedom of movement. This is exactly what the legislation is continuing. It continues on, quote, an individual may be required by a human biosecurity control order to attend a specified medical facility to facilitate assessment or treatment of ill individuals, including undergoing an examination, providing body samples for diagnosis, treatment, or undergoing a vaccination. It is essential where an individual is suspected of suffering from a listed human disease that the individual will be moved to an appropriate place where the medical treatment and privacy can be assured. Now, the article continues on. I give a bit of history about the legislation itself, how it got overshadowed by the 2013 election process. It was coming in around that time and it got overshadowed. But Johnno, when I read this, again, it goes back to that war on the people. They're setting up the catalyst for when they flip the switch, and anyone who questions the system's a terrorist, anyone who questions the authority around them, the world around them is a terrorist. You only have to be suspected of having symptoms, even though there's been no Ebola in Australia. You only have to have suspected symptoms. You can be taken to a facility, forced vaccinations, control orders in place. This is scary stuff, Johnno, and I know that you looked into it earlier this week. If you have anything more to discuss from this terrible legislative
Well,
piece.
I did do a video on my channel, John the Bond, which if people haven't seen, I recommend they go and check out. And I think I spent about 20 minutes, and some of that actually went through the memorandum, like basically the bill from the government website that lists all of these bills. And I went through it, and part 3 where they talk about what they can do now, and this is law now, right? The part that went through the clauses, each clause just gets worse after each one gets progressively worse. And it starts off talking about how they can nab you for up to a day without having to even tell you, give you any evidence as to why they've nabbed you, right? That you get back from the airport, okay, and they can pick you up and take you away now, okay? This sounds ridiculous, so I don't expect you to believe me. You have to go and check this for yourself, or watch my video where I show the evidence. This is their memorandum. This is their bill. So it starts off talking about how they can just collect you for up to a day. I don't have to tell you why or give you any reasons as to why. And then it starts going through what they can do with you. And it starts off with things that seem innocent enough, relatively speaking, like force you to wear certain clothes, stop you from going to work. But then it gets into talking about how they can force vaccinate you, and then douse you with chemicals to, I'm laughing, but how else can you respond to this? The madness that we are currently experiencing in this country, and in the live chat, we've got about just over 40 people watching live in the live chat, and Chanted Wanderer was talking about how she posted this on a community message board, and people were attacking her saying, of course the government should be allowed to do this, and that for me is the most concerning part. I'm looking at this legislation going, gee, if only people knew, and then I realised, no, if people knew, most of them are so stupid right now. They would fully support letting the government collect you at the airport, take you away for up to date, giving you no evidence, and stick chemicals into you. Just no, you have to do it. They'd be totally with it. Lindsay, I'm rambling on a little bit here, but I'll throw to you there.
Okay, thanks for that. Actually, it reminds me of nuclear legislation they brought in years ago relating to the nuclear industry. And if there was some problem with a nuclear reactor, they had all this legislation very similar to this. They could come and collect you, take you away, isolate you, virtually almost anything they wanted to do. So it almost sounds like they've copied it from that. And it is frightening. I remember at the time there was a huge blow up over this, about the nuclear industry. And now we're just getting this. And like you say, that's the most concerning thing for me, is that most of the people are in favour of it. Oh yeah, the government's got the right to do this. And it really does concern me, because when the crunch comes, we won't be able to rely on them. Anyway, I'll throw that back to you.
Yeah, mate, and that's the thing. I saw this article, like I said in the video, I found it through Reddit. It was posted to the Australia subreddit. I saw it there, so I followed it. It was in The Guardian. So it's not like they're hiding this necessarily, but at the same time, it's not getting much focus, the fact that government now has these powers. But like I said, even if they did, based on the people that I talk to, in society, I don't think many of them would realise just how ridiculous this is. They'd probably support it either.
Well, you're right, Johnno, and I was about to mention that I have a similar story to Lisa, because the article that I posted got a lot of traction, thankfully. It got shared everywhere. But I was wondering why it got shared as much as it did, and why there was so many views and so much traffic coming. And occasionally through Facebook or through some of these mediums, you see it pop up in one of these groups, just on your newsfeed or whatever. You see that someone's posted there and they're discussing it. And there was 1 out of 6 people in this thread that was talking sense about, no, this is a limitation to your freedoms, you're only suspected of it, this is violation. Once the freedoms go, that's where I draw the line. Like, I'm all for preventing diseases, but if they can do this to you, I'm all for it. And people were saying, yeah, well, what do you think? Oh, they're locking you up to prevent a disease from spreading. What are they going to get you when you've got the disease? And like this whole mentality that this is a good thing. When we spoke on episode 2, I believe it was, about Ebola, about whether or not it was a pretext to round up citizens, how the CDC announced that they could just come and kidnap you from your home. And we have spoken about similar experiences where we've spoken to people and they've said, well, if they came and got you for Ebola, then you have to go. Like the brainwashing is so deep that they think that this is a good thing, but it won't be a good thing once they flip the switch and we become the ones that are suspected of the symptoms.
Yeah, and even if this Ebola thing was real, there was a genuine epidemic in Africa and all of that was legitimate, these would still be atrocious laws for reasons that should be obvious to anyone. What we haven't even discussed so far today is the fact that most of what we saw on the TV about Ebola was complete and utter garbage. It was fake. They would actually show people who had no problems with them pretending to be sick, and they'd show that on the TV. And if you don't know what you're looking at, you might be liable to believe it. But if you spend even a few moments critically analysing it, it was clear and blatant propaganda. And then you look at laws like this and you can see it was all part of the agenda right from the start. And we called it, like you said on episode 1 or 2 when we first started doing the show. I wouldn't have thought, though, that only 6 or 7 months later, they would have already passed bipartisan legislation allowing them to do whatever they want to you on the false premise of Ebola. I wouldn't have thought it would happen this quickly.
Yeah.
It's genuinely shocked me. I'd love to talk about it more, but we've got to move on. We've got a huge domestic segment today. The third topic is to do with a nurse that's been banned over an arms cache. Lindsay, take it away.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, this is the Courier Mail again on the 11th of May. And the headline read, Nurse cops ban over arms cache. Now, the quote was, a Queensland nurse accused of stockpiling arms in preparation for an invasion by Indonesia has been suspended by medical watchdogs. The state's health ombudsman announced last week he had placed a prohibition order on Russell Douglas Drinkwater, 53, preventing him from nursing following his arrest in March. And that's the end of the quote. The headline attracted me to this article over the use of the word arms cache. I mentioned this recently in conjunction with another article, and the use of this term to describe anyone with even a rusty old fishing knife in Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, Russia. This is another term we are being primed to accept in association with terrorists, and there are heaps of others. Even if it is a nurse who is afraid of an Indonesian invasion. Now, I don't know about this bloke. He may know something we don't know about Indonesia. But it seems to be that they like using these terms over and over, and this is twice now in what, 2 or 3 weeks. And I just thought I'd mention it so that when they bring another article or two up and they use that term, people are well aware. Oh, righto, here's the propaganda. This is what we're being primed with. So I'll leave it at that and throw that back to you, Johnno, and just see what you've got to say.
Well, you're right about the propaganda and weaponising certain terms, if you like. Do you know that when the Ebola propaganda nonsense was taking place in America, they announced a new person, who's like the head of saving America from Ebola, and his title was the Ebola Tsar. They're actually using the word Tsar more and more and more, and then you think to yourself, they can literally use communist terminology now to even describe their own, can't think of the word, what do you call it? Bureaucrats. They can actually describe their own bureaucrats in communist terms, and people still don't seem to understand that we're not living in a secular liberal democracy with free market capitalism and all the rest of it. They can actually start calling this a communist country. People still wouldn't work out that it's a communist country. That's how overt it's getting, and I agree with you, Lindsay. I think they're using this term cache more and more to get that notion to people's minds. Ethan, what say you?
I agree, and then it goes back to what you just said at the end of that last segment about how fast it's gone. Since we've started doing this podcast, from when we started doing it at the start of October to now, in just those matter of months, just how far everything's gone, where they can use terms like that, they can pass bills where we get rounded up, you know what I mean? They can paint people in the Courier Mail, they can just demonize them, and it brainwashes a whole country into demonizing those people. We're living in some pretty sick times, and it's ramping up very, very quick, and it's actually, I say that a lot, I've said it a lot since we started this show, but at the moment, it really is ramping up quick, Johnno.
Certainly is. We're in the live chat. We've got about 50 people watching live at the moment. In the live chat, a few comments I want to read out. Rorschach said that he wasn't even allowed to write about the Nazis. He's one of our listeners who's still in high school. He says that he wasn't even allowed to write about the Nazis. He wasn't allowed to use the word Nazi, which I'm not really sure what's going on at schools at the moment, but you can bet that if you tried to write anything that was at all objective about the Nazis, there's no way that they should get away with it in a school today, and yet we're supposed to be the free ones, and it's just completely ridiculous. Greg Williams says, anyone tweets about the Jews and they get SWAT teams within hours, and yet ISIS have thousands of Twitter followers and they can't find them. And it is ridiculous, isn't it? People actually believe that the US government, if they wanted to, couldn't just destroy. Suppose ISIS exists, for argument's sake. You don't think the US government could have it destroyed within moments? People actually believe that ISIS is somehow so tricky. That's how dumb people have gotten. They need their terrorist groups to have social media accounts. And 44,000 Twitter followers, how many of those are bought? You know what I mean? I don't even know where to start with this nonsense. We've got to move on, boys, because time is of the essence. But Lindsay, this is an important topic, so I'll let you get the final word and then we'll press on.
Yeah, well, I think we've pretty much said it all. I'm looking for other words. We've got the medical breakthroughs. We've got the arms cache. You just come up with the term czar, and I would like our followers, or well, I shouldn't use listeners, to start picking out words or phrases themselves that have impinged on them from the news media, so that we can all be informed and we can all start looking for them, so that we build up almost like a little dictionary of terms these people are using to brainwash us. I think that'd be a good start. Okay, that's all I've got to say. I'll throw it back to you now.
Yeah, in the live chat, Robot Broken says that Nazi is the new F word. And yeah, while you're looking through the media to find these terms, also pay attention to how much anti-Nazi propaganda there is 70 years after the war, and ask yourself, why are they doing that? Why are they still demonizing National Socialism all these years later? And at school, when they were teaching us about how evil Hitler was, why didn't they get us to read his book Mein Kampf? I mean, if he was that evil, he must have said in his plan exactly all the bad things he was going to do. Why don't they encourage us to read the book? Think about that. Yeah. Anyway, moving on to the fourth topic for today, and that is to do with the US Consulate warning of imminent terror attacks in Australia, Ethan.
Yeah, Jono, the news continues on. This was from news.com.au, but it was all over the media this week. Entitled, it's an article by news.com.au 2 days ago entitled, "The US Consulate in Melbourne warns terror attack in Australia is likely." Quote, "The US Consulate in Melbourne has warned its citizens in Victoria and around the country to be on high alert, declaring a terror attack on Australian soil was likely. It's the first time this century that the Consulate has issued such a warning and said it reflected the heightened security level of the Australian government. The alert comes in the wake of a number of terror-related arrests in the state. Last month, a 17-year-old was charged on suspicion of carrying out a terror plot on Mother's Day. The police operation came just weeks after separate incidents where an 18-year-old Melbourne man was charged when police uncovered his plans for an ISIS-inspired terror attack on Anzac Day. Due to the nature of the ongoing threat, the US Consulate is compelling its citizens to, quote, maintain a high level of vigilance, end quote, and to, quote, take appropriate steps, end quote, to enhance their personal security. Here's what the alert says, quote, US citizens are strongly encouraged to review your personal security plan, remain aware of your surroundings, including local events, and monitor local news stations for updates, the alert says. And just continues on about the spokesperson, about his history, and he encouraged citizens living in Australia to enrol in the Department of State's Smart Traveller Enrolment Program, so they can track you and send you updates about the locations that you are, whether it's safe or not, whether you are entering into a high-risk zone or not. And the first thing that got me, and I'll go back to the top of the article, is the classic Orwell newspeak that they've said. It's the first time in this century that the Consulate has issued a warning and said it reflected the heightened security level of the Australian government. Well, that's just ridiculous. If it reflected the heightened security level, the threat would be less likely because the government has taken the steps to ensure it won't happen. They just can get away with spewing out this nonsense to say. So that one contradiction there should show you that if anything does happen, which they like to tell us in advance that it does happen, we're overdue for a massive, terrorist attack. Who knows what's going to happen? I fear that it will happen. I don't want it to happen. It'd be terrible if it did. But saying that it's a reflection of the heightened security level is just, it's ridiculous, and people are believing this, and the US citizens are on watch, Jono, because something's on the way.
Yeah, and I hadn't actually heard of that one until you brought that up with me before the show during pre-production. But it doesn't surprise me one bit. And the people out there who actually think that the terrorism is real and that ISIS is real and a genuine threat and all of this, I wonder if they ever ask themselves, how much less effective the terrorists would be if we didn't have the media telling us about the terrorists.
Okay.
Like think about it, if they're a terrorist and they want to terrorize you and they're all about terror, then that relies on you being scared of them. But their message is only getting to you through the media that you think is here to help you. And people can't see the problem with that. Lindsay, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, when you were talking about that, it just reminded me a bit of Port Arthur, because ever since Port Arthur and they got the laws changed, suddenly nobody's being shot. Nobody's being massacred in numbers or whatever. Suddenly there's no need for it anymore. So it's almost the same with this. You know, we've got to get these grubby laws through, so we'll threaten them with a terror act. I'm really quite worried about an act now, because when the US government starts telling you that there's going to be trouble in your country, I tend to believe them, because I think they're behind it all. So it is a bit of a concern to me. But I'm not sure that's how the rest of the population think. I think they think, the US government are talking about this. Oh, it must be true. They've got their agencies, their alphabet agencies looking into this. I don't think that's it at all. I think their alphabet agencies are probably going to do something just to get us all to start getting into lockstep. So that's my view on it. I'll throw it back to you now, Johnno.
Yeah, Lindsay, I'll just interject there. You're completely right. See, in my eyes, think about how the article's constructed. When I was trained as a journalist, it was always the construction of the article is how you get the people in. It was the same. We went over David Cameron's speech, the way that he has to introduce and whatnot. So they've said that it's a reflection of the heightened security. Then they go through the last 3 weeks, 3 separate ISIS-inspired attacks that have been foiled by the government. It's out of control. We're foiling them on a weekly basis, but maybe one day we won't be able to. We've already had the Sydney siege. We've got our heightened security. Be on alert, scare the people without giving them any statistics, without giving them any logical facts or reasoning for them to question. And in my opinion, this is either going to lead to them actually doing something, which could be the catalyst for something much bigger that we look back on, hopefully, in the next 20 years or whatnot, and say, that's where that started. Or, as you said, Lindsay, they're going to do this to enforce more laws. We said after the latest trench of the Sydney siege and the 3 terrorism bills passed through, that they wanted more to pass through. Who knows what could be on the horizon, Johnno? It seems like it's either way. It doesn't seem like it's a good thing whenever the Consulate says a terror attack's likely.
Yeah, and if I wanted to know when the next terrorist attack would be, I'd just be watching Fox programming, because they tend to tell you in advance. And what am I talking about? Well, the Lone Ranger. How many people out there in Australia are aware that there was an X-Files spin-off called The Lone Ranger, and in the first episode of The Lone Ranger, somebody hijacks a plane and attempts to fly them into the Twin Towers. That actually happened, and that happened a few months. That went to air a few months before 9/11. And yet you've got Condoleezza Rice saying, I don't think that anyone could have foresaw that they would hijack a plane and use it as a missile. Yes, someone could foresee it. They made a show about it that got broadcast to America like 6 months before the event actually happened. And people think this is a coincidence. If someone thinks that is a mere coincidence, there's not much hope for them. And if we don't press on with this domestic segment, there's not much hope for us. But the next one is a nice little segue. Topic 5 for today, Lindsay, is to do with the ABC, the Marxist ABC, getting even nuttier.
Righto. This was on the 5th of May in the Courier Mail, and it said, "Why reading is now bad for children." That was the headline. And I'll quote, "The ABC," and that's for people overseas, that's the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, "has questioned whether parents should read to their children at bedtime, claiming doing so could give them an unfair advantage. Is having a loving family an unfair advantage?" asked the headline of a story on the ABC website. Should parents snuggling up for one last story before lights out be even a little concerned about the advantage they might be conferring? This is unbelievable stuff to read. The story was followed by an ABC Radio national broadcast on the apparently divisive issue of bedtime reading. Evidence shows that the difference between those who get bedtime stories and those who don't is bigger than the difference between those who get elite private schooling and those who don't. British academic Adam Smith said in an interview with Joe Galonesi, Gelonesi. Galonesi responded online, "This devilish twist of evidence surely leads to a further conclusion that perhaps bedtime stories should be restricted." He said the bedtime stories angle was highlighted as a way of getting attention. That is obviously not what we think, he said. Now, and that's the end of the quote. Now, my comment about this was, with the prevalence of Marxist clowns in the ABC, who would know if it was obvious that that's not what they think? You can't tell now. I mean, there's so much absolute Marxist garbage comes out of the ABC, and they take it seriously. Who are we to guess whether they're serious or not about bedtime stories? So that was, it just caught me. I couldn't believe this when I read it. I thought, this is the sort of drivel that we're getting in the newspaper. Anyway, I'll throw it back to Ethan first and see what he's got to say about this.
Yeah, Lindsay, I try to be amused and try to be lighthearted about these stories, but it's just it really, sometimes, we've said this on the show before, maybe life is just a test of who can survive this matrix and come out on the other side and not drive themselves mental. I mean, talking about an unfair advantage of reading to your child at bed, increasing their literary skills, increasing their enjoyment in wanting to read when they grow up, the basis that they're trying to destroy, the written language that they have that they're trying to destroy. They want everything online, they don't want books anymore. And now they're just putting this into the subconscious of the people. Reading to your child is just an attention ploy, it's just to make you seem like you're a good parent. Don't read to your child, it's an unfair advantage. It's madness, Johnno, and it's just so much garbage that comes out of the ABC on the regular.
Yeah, and when I saw this one in Lindsay's agenda, I was glad that he put it there because I had the exact same reaction. They can come out and say, oh, we're not actually saying that parents shouldn't be allowed to read to their children. We're just using that as a way to highlight the disparity, what have you. They can say that, but I had the same reaction. With the ABC, how would you know?
Yeah.
That's how ridiculous and nutty and leftist. I don't like the word leftist, really, because the whole right-left paradigm is nutty, but it definitely is Marxist. So whether you think Marxism is leftist or whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's a Marxist organisation. $1 billion a year is their annual budget. $1 billion per year to spread propaganda like this, and it's propaganda almost every day. I have to correct myself as well. Earlier I referred to the lone gunman as the Lone Ranger. I was incorrect. It's the Lone Gunman. I'm sure most of our listeners are familiar with that program, but if you haven't seen it before, just go and check out the Lone Gunman, the first episode, and I recommend you watch it in full from start to finish. Don't just watch the important clip. Watch the episode from start to finish, and I've said enough about it. Go and check it out if you haven't already. But getting back onto this nutty Marxist leftist agenda, Lindsay, I also did a video during the week for John LeBon talking about the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and how they're reporting that the Canadian government is thinking of bringing in laws which will make it essentially illegal to say that you want to boycott Israel. They're going to call that hate speech, right? And you look at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and their role in this, in the terror psyops that they had late last year. You look at the ABC's role in our terror psyops here, and they're using tax money to spread fear and nonsense to the people. And like you said, Ethan, what can you do? You can either laugh or cry because the situation we're in right now, it's absurd. We've got to press on though, Lindsay, and the sixth topic for today is to do with the Brisbane Airport and closed CCTV, closed caption TV. Is that what it stands for? Closed circuit. Closed circuit TV. Take it away.
Thanks, Johnno. Another pretty distressing article this week that was released on May 10th. It was actually when we were doing our broadcast last week for the Sydney Morning Herald. It was released, and I'll just read out from the article here before we get into a discussion. And look how it starts off. Every move you make, every step you take, Brisbane Airport will be watching you. The Brisbane Airport Corporation and the Queensland University of Technology's Airport Innovation Research Lab have been working on CCTV technology to increase security and hopefully efficiency at the international port. BAC General Manager of Operations Stephen Goodwin said that work was close to paying off, with new technology headed towards intelligent CCTV data that was set to revolutionise security at the airport. Quote, currently CCTV isn't always manned in the sense of it being constantly monitored, he said. It just records and you go back if something happens and you look at the recording. So what this will do is help us directly monitor what's happening in the terminal in real time. Using what Mr. Goodwin called, quote, soft biometrics, such as the color of clothing being worn, along with facial recognition technology, the cameras in the terminal would soon be able to identify or track down any individual who has come through customs. Quote, once you get through that customs gate, it's not that easy for them to find you. So with this new thing, it'll connect the information that comes from the smart gates directly with the CCTV and directly to the person of interest, Mr. Goodwin said. Then wherever that person of interest is, we'll know where they are. And the article continues on to talk about more Orwellian Big Brother nonsense, but here we are again in Queensland, a state that already has applications in the Queen Street Mall to track your iPhones, track your movement for tourist statistics. We have new cameras being installed everywhere that I've noticed just over the last couple of years of me being here. A truly Orwellian state that we do live in as it is. And now they're talking about real-time CCTV at the international airport to make sure that they can monitor every single person there. And when I saw that, I thought about the connections, because they like to hit a lot of birds with one stone, Jono. And you think about the whole passport dilemma, how they can cancel your passport. They don't want us to leave the country specifically. They don't want us to leave. They want to track everyone doing it. What better way than with CCTV technology to monitor everyone in real time? To identify who's there, and with facial recognition, you won't be able to escape, Jono.
And what happens if you get off the plane and as you're walking through the terminal, you sneeze, and next thing you know, you're locked up to a day without being told why, and they can inject you with whatever they want. And if that sounds ridiculous, that's because it is ridiculous, and yet that's the law today. Lindsay, I'll throw to you.
Yeah. I don't know whether, we use the word law, but in fact it's legislation. So, I think there's a way around a lot of this garbage. But then again, they're the ones with the muscle, the guns and whatever. So even whether they're right or wrong, they're still going to enforce it, aren't they? So, it's sort of a bit of a mixed bag here. I was looking at this same sort of thing in a video during the week, and they were advertising it to be used in banks. And they were singing the praises of it for banks. Oh, this is wonderful stuff. They come in, the customers come in, it picks everybody up, it does the facial recognition, we know who they are, anything happens later on, we've got them done to rights, and it almost sounds exactly what these people are saying about the airport. So this isn't a new thing generally. I think it's been around for a while. It's just now coming out of the banks, etc., and coming into the public sector. So to me it is a concern. So where does it end? And we've already got the police driving around the streets with cameras picking up everybody's registration and checking it automatically. It's not an exaggeration to say they'll have the goods on us no matter where we are. They'll be able to tell you your whole life story between your phone, your car registration, your facial recognition in public buildings or whatever. It really is becoming a bit of a nightmare. And in the past, I've been afraid that people are going to think I'm a nutter about this, but I don't think I am. I think it's really starting to become quite serious now. So I'll throw it back to Ethan and just see if he's got a comment on that.
Yeah, you're right, Lindsay. And the way that I see it is a lot of people can argue that the New World Order, call them what you want, when they enforce this Agenda 21 driven system that they want highly regulated, a surveillance grid so they can track everyone in real time, what they're doing and where they're going. And you just gave two perfect examples of how it's already been talking about going into banks. The police already have it. They can pick up registration. We have all of these cameras throughout the city that can track you wherever you are. Now at airports, facial recognition, CCTV. We've spoken about Samsung TVs that spy on your own house. This is truly setting up. And the way that I see it now is that they're setting up the grid. Everything's going to be around us, and all they have to do is flick the switch, and there'll be nothing to get out. They're incrementally putting all of this in place: the laws, the mentality within the masses, the surveillance, the muscle, the police state. All of this is in place. But then, as soon as we become the terrorists, as soon as people that question the terrorists, Jono, we become the terrorists, and they'll already have the grid there, and it could almost be unescapable at that point.
If you want to trip out, next time you're talking to a new random person, ask them how they would feel if there was an optional rollout at schools to have kids microchips for their safety. Ask them how they would feel about that, and ask a few people, get yourself a decent sample size, and it will spin you out what people will say to you. And I know this because I do this myself. And I do get out there and try and talk to new random people all the time to keep my finger on the pulse of what people are believing, but also just to put messages out there, even if it's just planting a little seed in their head, whether it's questioning the UN or whether it's questioning sea level rises or whatever. Just planting little seeds in people's head is usually the best that you can hope to do. And what I've been doing lately is asking them, how would you feel if there was an optional rollout of microchipping at schools to keep kids safe, and see people's responses, and that'll give you an idea of just how brainwashed people are at the moment. They've got no idea. And it reminds me of how there are video games now where you can, I think this is how it works, you put a little thing on your TV and it records your movements. Yeah. And you think to yourself, people don't see, and people can't see through. like how obvious does it have to be for someone to work out what's going on?
Gogglebox.
We've
got Gogglebox on TV, on Prime TV. The TV's watching you. This is madness.
Sure. Just put a thing in the middle of my lounge room that watches what I can do during the day, that's connected to the internet, that I know that the government can use against me anytime that they want legally. Sure, I don't see a problem with that. I mean, the mindset of the people that we're surrounded by, it's disturbing, and that's why, I'll be honest, come a Friday afternoon, if I have had a productive week making lots of videos, I turn on the RL Burnside, I get out the gin, and I lock myself away from the world for a couple of days. And it's been a lot of fun, but I am struggling today. I tell you what, we are struggling for time as well. We've got to move on to the 7th topic for domestic, and this is to do with another cover-up of Jewish child sex abuse. And I was meant to do this one last week, but didn't get time, but I've got to get through it today. It's a long one, so bear with me now. Back in February of this year on episodes 18, 19 and 20 of the Australian Roundtable Podcast, we covered the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sex abuse, which was at the time focusing on the sex abuse within Jewish schools, having spent the previous 2 years focusing on sex abuse within places like the Catholic Church. Now, for those who haven't heard those episodes, I do recommend you go back and listen to them. And they're all available in MP3 format from our site, AusroundTable.com, because we spent a fair bit of time pouring through the information from different outlets to put together the bigger picture, because the mainstream media has an amazing tendency to only publish snippets here and there and never connect the dots for you. So that's what we did. We connected the dots, and it's all there, and it painted a disgusting picture of what was going on in some of their schools. In a nutshell, for those who don't remember, the chief rabbis of Sydney and New South Wales were involved in protecting an alleged child sex abuser within their Jewish schools who fled the country soon after the allegations were raised against him. I think he fled to either New York or to Israel, one of the two. One of those same rabbis was awarded an Order of Australia by the then Prime Minister John Howard in the same year that all of this took place. And you can even see a photo of Howard with the rabbi, Howard holding a menorah, that's the Jewish candle thing, and grinning while he was awarding this guy the Order of Australia, a guy who we found out was covering up sex abuse within his school and allowing the guy to flee the country as soon as allegations were brought against him. Now, we found out, and I only discovered this by doing the research into that whole thing, that there's a policy called Mazira, I believe I'm pronouncing that properly, where Jews don't inform on fellow Jews to secular authorities. So even when you know, the idea is that if you know that a fellow Jew is breaking the law or whatever, the idea is you shouldn't be reporting it to secular authorities, deal with it as an in-group. And anyone who spends any time studying the Jewish diaspora understands that they do have a very strong in-group mentality. And that's what they do. They don't report on each other. So that's what was happening here. That people were even being threatened not to go to the authorities and report about the child sex abuse that was taking place at these schools, because if they did, they were risking being ostracized from the rest of the community because they were breaking this code of Mazira, which, like I said, until earlier this year, I'd never even heard of any of this. Those alleged to have committed the crimes against the children were allowed to keep teaching, and when they were asked to front the Royal Commission, one right rabbi even claims that he didn't know it was a crime for a teacher to touch kids' genitals. On and on it went. And it should have been a national scandal, but who, apart from our loyal listeners, would even remember any of this? It's completely swept from the news now. No one would even remember it. Now, we all know how depraved the Catholic Church can be because the media tells us about it all the time. But if you want to get an insight into some of the depravity that's taking place at Jewish schools, go back and listen to episode 18 of the Australian Roundtable Podcast. And I've got a whole new thing to talk about today. That's just the primer. But before I get going, I don't want to speak too much, give the audience a respite from my voice. Ethan, you remember episode 18 and what we were discussing back then?
I do, Johnno, and again, it goes, I think I entitled episode 18, The Tentacles, where did the tentacles lead? And we've seen that these certain agendas are embedded in most things that we do talk about at the highest levels, and this was just an example. We as you said, you painted a sick picture of what was going on. You painted that there was a lot of covering up and a lot of treason within our government, if you want to call it that. Our government letting this, John Howard letting this, get away with this, and Yeah, it's terrible stuff, but again, the mainstream media is not going to be there to tell you about it, and that's where we have to be to do it.
And that's the issue. The mainstream media can report on facts, and sometimes they do. Sometimes they do report factually, but the issue is they're not painting together a bigger picture. So if they leave out the fact that, oh, what we're reporting on now, there's actually instances of it happening in the past, they're not painting the bigger picture for you, and they won't, which is why we have to go through and pour through all of the things that they report, and then realize, hey, this all ties in together. So that was to do with the Royal Commission into Child Sex Abuse earlier in the year. And I don't know if that commission is still going, but it had been going for a couple of years. And of course, originally started off because of the revelations about what was going on in the Catholic Church. But anyway, just recently, there's been another thing that popped up, and I wanted to discuss it today. This is from the Herald Sun on May 7. MP, so a Member of Parliament, Michael Danby, unwittingly helped Jewish principal later accused of molesting children get her visa, court told. I'm going to read from the article, quote, Federal Labor MP Michael Danby helped an ultra-Orthodox Jewish principal accused of molesting a string of students secure a visa to work in Australia, a court has heard. 2 letters written by the Melbourne Port's MP in support of Malka Leifa were today tendered in a Supreme Court trial against the former principal and Elsternwick's Adass Israel School. However, Mr. Danby, who was boarding a flight to Melbourne from the Ukraine today, said if the allegations against Mrs. Leifa were true, she should face criminal charges. The civil action has been brought by a former student in her 20s who says she was molested by Mrs. Leifa up to 3 times a week over several years. The woman said she and 2 of her sisters were preyed upon by their respected leader after she became aware of their troubled home life and offered them private religious tuition. All 3 sisters have told the court they were routinely abused by Mrs. Leifa at the school, her home, and on school camps. In explosive allegations, it was alleged members of the ultra-Orthodox community threatened the sister's oldest sibling with ostracism if the civil sex abuse claim against Mrs. Leifa wasn't dropped. The woman has harassed and pressured shortly before her death from a heart attack, the court heard. They threatened her with her job and her reputation and her children's marriage prospects, the woman's sister and the claimant in the civil matter said. The woman told her Supreme Court trial today, Mrs. Leifa assaulted her between 2 and 3 times a week while she was a student. The abuse at Leifa's home and at camps continued after she started teaching at the school. The court heard the woman started suffering flashbacks, nightmares, and suicidal thoughts because of the abuse. She reported the abuse to a counsellor in 2008, just days before Mrs. Leifa returns to Israel with her 8 children. End quote. Now, I'll go into further detail about her fleeing the country in a moment, but the key things from that article are that a prominent Jewish member of Parliament, Michael Danby, helped the alleged child sex abuser get a work visa to enter Australia in the first place. And once again, we've got further insight into how the Jewish community threatens those within it who use the secular legal system to seek justice. During the Royal Commission into Child Sex Abuse, we learned about Mazara, as we discussed earlier, whereby Jews are trained from a young age not to inform on fellow Jews to non-Jews at the risk of ostracism and expulsion. And again, in this article, we hear that marriage prospects are threatened to keep people quiet. And this behaviour is alien to the vast majority of Australians, and they ought to know more about it. The article goes on, Leifa is currently under house arrest in article where extradition proceedings at the request of Victoria Police have started in an attempt to have her returned to Melbourne to face criminal charges. It is understood Ms. Leifa could face dozens of charges of indecent assault and rape, end quote. Now, it'll be very interesting to see if this extradition goes ahead. We know how the Israelis love to extradite frail old men and charge them for alleged Holocaust crimes that were allegedly committed decades ago. Let's see how they feel about extraditing an alleged child sex abuser who is accused of abusing Jewish kids. Now, I've got more information on this, but quickly, Lindsay, what do you make of all of this?
Yeah, I can understand what you're talking about. We, like you say, we went through all this before, and it is true. They do this sort of thing. I wouldn't restrict it to leaning on people or reducing their marriage prospects. I think if they damage the community in general too much, they're liable to finish up dead, because there's been instances of that before as well. And even in the Talmud, they warn them about that. So I can see that it is a real problem. But like you've just said, the major problem is that we never hear about it. That's the major problem. They don't ever release this sort of thing to the public in any way that the public can understand. It's always drips and drops, and you never get the full picture. Now, the second thing to highlight here is how many other people does Danby help come to Australia or whatever that are Jews? It's this working circles within circles, and how often is that promoting people in Australia? And how many times do they get away with doing that, and we never hear about it or understand it? That's the other thing that worries me. So I can see lots of things coming out of this. I'll be interested to see where it goes. I'll be interested to see whether they do send this woman back to Australia, because I know there have been a lot of people who did bad things in Russia, fled, or even in America, fled to Israel, and they never ever get extradited back. Israel will cover for them and refuse to send them back. So I would think it'd be the same. If she's got any influence in Israel, she won't come back here. So when that happens, if it happens, and if we can lay our hands on that information when the time comes, maybe we can make a big story about that. But I think that's what will happen. They've got two rules, one for them and one for us. So I'll throw it back to Ethan and see what he's got to say about it.
Yeah, I agree, Lindsay, and only time will tell once we see that. That's the perfect catalyst to see whether or not there is, proper influence there. But again, and the thing that I wanted to add on, we've gone past that now, was going back to the mentality of internalizing your affairs, of doing this. It's something that is not reported on. That's why why information like this is so closely kept, and it's not just with the Jews specifically. It's with the people that for our politicians that we're run by them. Like this whole system, this spider web. They're also in on the overall mentality of, no, you keep it within the internalized sector and you don't let this sort of information get out to the public. And that's the real danger of it all, is that it's so closely kept that it's hard to figure out information like this. And when you do, you have to, as Lindsay's just done, hypothesize for the future about what's going to take place. But at the same time, we have to be here to piece the puzzle that we do have together to paint a picture of what's going on, Johnno.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I love doing this show is because I have to do so much research for it, and I learn things. And I only learned about this practice of Messiah earlier this year. I'm supposed to be a highly educated person. I did well through high school, went to university, and yet I had never heard of the practice of Messiah, this policy where Jewish people are not supposed to inform on fellow Jews to secular authorities. I'd never heard of it. I was genuinely surprised when I read about it. Now, you might say that that's just my naivety, and I'd agree with you. It was naivety, but why was I that naive? How come I didn't know that? And people might say, oh, but the Jewish community is only a tiny community within Australia. Well, so are Muslims, and we're told every day about how terrified we should be about possible Muslim terrorists. And what's more, we know that Jews make up half of the 10 wealthiest families in Australia. Even though they make up a tiny percentage of the total people in Australia, they happen to have an awful amount of influence and power and wealth. That's just the facts. Like I said, half of the 10 wealthiest families in Australia are Jewish. So perhaps we should know a little bit more about their community, and perhaps we should know the fact that they will go to the point of ostracizing their own members for speaking out against sex abuse. And there was a part of that article that I want to read out again. The woman was harassed and pressured shortly before her death from a heart attack, the court heard. Now, that's all the article mentions about her death, but she would have been, I suspect, in her 20s to have already died, because her sisters are all that age as well. So she died from a heart attack in her 20s or 30s. Seems odd, doesn't it? And she was being pressured just before that. Interesting. Anyway, I want to move on to the next bit. Next article, this is from The Age down in Melbourne, May 8. School committee associates flew a Das Israel school principal out of Melbourne, trial told. Quote, a school committee conspired to fly its principal out of the country after allegations of child sex abuse were raised against her, a court has heard. Mel Khalifa fled to Israel on an early morning flight in March 2008, just days after allegations were made that she had abused students at a Das Israel school in Elsternwick. Mayor Ernst told the Supreme Court on Friday of an emergency meeting where the congregation at Das Israel Committee decided to sack Mrs. Leifer and arrange for her and her family to leave Australia. The congregation is partly responsible for running the ultra-Orthodox Jewish school. Mr. Ernst said he then asked his wife Hadassah to arrange plane tickets through the eastern suburbs travel agents she worked for, owned and run by Tammy Koniarski. Mrs. Koniarski told the court how Mrs. Ernst called her about 10 p.m. on March 5, telling her she needed urgent tickets out of the country. She said she met Mrs. Ernst at their office later that night to process a sale using a supplied credit card number to hand over the tickets. The court heard that Mrs. Leifer flew out of Australia to Israel at 1:20 a.m. on March 6, the next morning, a few hours later. Mr. Ernst said nobody specifically asked him to arrange the tickets, but rather it was a collective decision of the committee. When asked, Mr. Ernst said he had no idea who paid for the tickets, which cost over $8,000. I don't remember at all, even if payment came into consideration at that time, he told the court, end quote. So he doesn't remember who paid for the tickets. It didn't even come up. There was a credit card from somebody, so they used it to fly an alleged sex offender out of the country as soon as possible. In fact, they called a friend in the eastern suburbs, which I infer basically just means Caulfield, which is the Jewish hub of Melbourne. They called their friend in the eastern suburbs, who was a big wheel in the travel agency game, at 10 p.m, and the alleged sex offender was on a plane to Israel 3 hours later. But here's the real kicker from the same article, quote, Mr. Ernst said he was not aware of anyone on the committee contacting police to pass on the allegations at the time, end quote. So just like with the Royal Commission revelations, they managed to find the time to help their fellow Jews escape punishment, but they never seem to remember to notify the police that a school official has allegedly sex abused innocent children under their care. And then, when those children grow up and dare to seek justice for what they've suffered, they're threatened with ostracism and expulsion from the tribe. What a lovely bunch. Now, I've got a little bit more to say on this before I move on, but Ethan, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, it's ridiculous stuff, John, isn't it? Yeah, it's just a manifestation, you know, of what you see on the highest levels of control. You know, once something happens, you know, that all of the reinforcements, or, you know, I'm wording this terribly, but you see this support network of people or of powers. You know, he says he doesn't know where the credit card come from, but you see this mentality even on the highest of levels, that once one person gets exposed, you can assure that they'll be protected, or they'll have their agenda will still be served once they're gone. You know, this power grid that we do have, and then it goes down even to the smallest levels. So I think it's just a terrible revelation to discover, and it paints it right there if you put the pieces together from the previous article about you know, people being harassed and whatnot to now. It's unbelievable.
It is almost unbelievable.
And I actually use that in the right context this time.
It is almost unbelievable, but it gets worse. From the end of that Age article, quote, Mrs. Leifer was arrested in the West Bank settlement town of Emmanuel in August last year and is facing extradition to Victoria to face child sex abuse charges, end quote. Now, for those who are not au fait with Israeli geography, this means that the alleged sex abuser is now living in one of the many areas that is supposed to belong to the Arabs, and the international community agrees belongs to the Arabs, but the Israelis take and build upon anyway. And in case you think that sounds too coincidental to be true, let me read this from the Jewish newspaper Haaretz, from an article published just 3 months ago. It's entitled, PA urges more than condemnation of Israel's latest West Bank expansion plans, 10 February 2015. Quote, the Palestinian Authority called on the international community to do more than condemn Israel's latest plan to expand communities in the West Bank. Israel is planning to expand the communities of Emmanuel, Keduman, Neviv Latsuf, and Vered Jericho, Haaretz reported Monday, end quote. So there you have it. An alleged child sex abuser of her own people at the school at which she was a principal, and a justice dodger, and an Arab occupier to boot. She got into Australia with the help of a Jewish member of parliament, and her quick escape from Australia once the allegations surfaced was facilitated by fellow Jewish school community members. The victim has since been threatened with ostracism if she fails to drop the court case. What more can you say, Lindsay? I'll throw to you.
Yeah, well, I suppose there is a bit more. I can remember Jim Stone talking about this when he was involved with a synagogue at one stage. I think he was either married or he was had a girlfriend who was Jewish, and they accepted him into the synagogue. And then when he did a runner, they tried to poison him a couple of times. And when you said that about the woman, 20-year-old having a heart attack, that's the first thing that came into my mind, was that somebody liable to have poisoned her. Now I can't say whether they have or not, but it just triggered that memory about what Jim Stone had said. So I put nothing past these people. We've just been through it all. It really is a disgraceful behaviour, and it just shows the arrogance. They're so arrogant, they think they can never ever be forced to make recompense for their damage. And that's how they view themselves. They're above the law. They're above any sort of comeback. It will change, and they know it will change because it always has. Every time they've had to do a runner, they've been booted out of a country, or they've finished up copping a thrashing by the people they live amongst who actually got sick and tired of this garbage. So they know it's coming. A lot of them are already prepared for it, but it still doesn't stop them from overreaching all the time. I'm not quite sure what the mentality is that causes them to behave like this. I'm sort of half, I'm just about run out of things to say, because every time I read something or I listen to something about this, it's always the same. And you think, they're supposed to be very intelligent people. You'd think they would have picked up on this. If you know you're going to suffer, you've always suffered as a result of your behaviour, why don't you change your behaviour? But it doesn't seem to get through to them. So there's very little else I can say about these people. I'll just throw it back to you, Johnno, and let you get on with the rest of your talk.
Well, that's the end of the part that I had written down. I was just hoping to get into more of a general discussion right now. And we know that whenever there's a so-called terrorist attack, the talking heads on TV come out and say that the Muslim community have to come out and condemn the terror and distance themselves from the terrorists, and justify that they're not terrorists, just that the terrorists are the minority. They expect the Muslim community to come out and prove that they're not also terrorists. How come we don't hear people saying that the non-sex abusing or sex abuse helping or co-conspiring Jews should come out and say that this has nothing to do with them? And I happen to know some Jewish people. I have some Jewish friends. I went to Monash University, which is, they've actually got a campus in Caulfield. So I happen to know plenty of Jewish people. And what concerns me is that I think a lot of them are oblivious to what some of the others are doing. And if and when Australia wakes up to what's going on with this policy of Messiah, not reporting on what's going on, conspiring in business, and all these other practices, I fear that there are going to be some innocent Jews who are going to find themselves in a lot of trouble because they don't realise the extent of what's going on in their own community. Ethan, what say you?
I can see your concerns, John. I think that's a realistic thing. We see it now with the way that people have been brainwashed about Muslims, that innocent Muslim people are being targeted, that every Muslim's a terrorist, and you've just didn't believe that. But then if it goes to a realistic level, of course, people just identify with stereotypes. That's what we've been drilled for generations, about stereotypes. And once, if you come out, if it was revealed that this was happening, not that it will be, because that the control grid is that strong with these certain individuals. But if it ever did come out, I can see where your concerns would span from, Johnno, because that stereotype would encompass a lot of innocent people, as it always would with any stereotype.
Yeah, and like I said, I know Jewish people. I know some of them very well, and I don't believe that they've got anything to do with any of this. And I believe if they knew about it, they would be against it. And I don't want to see them come into any harm for the misdeeds of the people who lead their communities. But sadly, the truth is that it is the leaders of their community. We found out during the Royal Commission into Sex Abuse that it was the head rabbis of Sydney and New South Wales who were involved in this, in covering up the crimes of people who they knew had committed crimes and helping them to flee the country. That's the people at the top of the community.
Yeah.
And everyone underneath that are going to be judged according to those misdeeds if and when they ever come out. And what we're talking about here is just child sex abuse within some Jewish schools. I say just, it's a horrific thing. But this is really the tip of the iceberg of some of the misdeeds that are going on from some of these people in these communities. And if and when people start to wake up to what's really happened in history, there's going to be a lot of carnage, sadly. I don't want to see it, but that's what we're headed for. And I just hope that some of the more reasonable people within that community can start to see it and start speaking out against it. Because if they don't, then the wake-up is going to be a horrific one. And just recently there was a documentary released called Hellstorm. Kyle Hunt has been working on it for a long time. And this chronicles what happened in Germany when cities were firebombed. And it chronicles what happened to the German nation after the end of World War II. And we've got films coming out of Hollywood that always tell us about the victimhood of the Jewish people. Now, we know that director, Steven Spielberg, who makes these Hollywood movies about the Holocaust, we know that he's a liar. He's been exposed as a liar. And if you go and watch Spielberg's hoax, Last Days of the Big Lie, you'll see that his films about the Holocaust involve people blatantly lying, and we know they're lying because we've got footage of them telling completely different stories. So that's the kind of thing that we're getting fed through Hollywood about the victims that we're told the Jews were during and after World War II, but very few people have any idea what happened in Germany following World War II and what happened to the German people. And if people go and watch that film, Hellstorm, I've been impressed, I've seen people talking about it in the live chat, if people go and watch that and have some understanding of who were genuinely victims in World War II, the German people, the German nation, what happened especially to their women following the war and when the Russians got there, if they understood any of this, I think some of them might decide to start looking into things deeper. And once you start doing that, you realize that you've been completely and utterly lied to about World War II and what really happened. And if and when people wake up to that fact, I do think there is going to be some negative consequences for a lot of people. Many of them will deserve those negative consequences. What concerns me is that some of them won't deserve those consequences. Lindsay, you get what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah. No, I agree entirely. And that's what, and before you were talking about all the deadheads that you meet who have got no idea what's going on. But I think you'll find that they are the ones who are the worst. When they realise just how badly they've been deceived, they will overreact in the other direction. That's what concerns me. I mean, people like you and I who know what's going on, you try to use a sufficient amount of emphasis or whatever. You know, you don't go over the top. But it's the dullards that worry me, because they will overreact and then they will start slaughtering people. That's what worries me about it. Anyway, I'll throw it back to you again. Keep going.
Yeah, and what will happen eventually is that people will come along and they will take some of my comments, Lindsay, or yours or Ethan's, out of context, and they'll try and paint us as being neo-Nazis or anti-Semites or people who want to harm people. They'll try and demonize us as best they can, but I think anyone who takes the time to listen to what we're talking about, to look at the research that we're providing, the evidence that we provide for what we're saying, and then spends time doing their own research, watching documentaries like Spielberg's Hoax, Last Days of the Big Lie, or watching Hellstorm, or watching Hitler, the Greatest Story Never Told, watching these for themselves objectively, understanding that they've been lied to, and listen to us and listen to the context of what we're saying. I would put to you, Lindsay and Ethan, and to our listeners, that what we're trying to do here is actually to soften the blow on the innocent people, and I do believe that there are innocent Jews out there who have got nothing to do with any of this, who themselves have been deceived. What we're trying to do, I would like to think, is help people wake up to what's really going on in a way that won't result in some of the bad retaliation that we don't want to see. I think what I'd like to see is more people becoming aware of the actual truth and then living their lives in accordance with that, rather than people suddenly finding out that they've had this massive illusion put upon them by Hollywood and school for all these years, and then to suddenly react violently. That's the last thing I'd want to see. And I don't think it's going to take violence or anything like that. I think when enough people become aware of what's really going on, things can be sorted out in an orderly fashion, but only if and when people find out what's really going on, what really happened in history, and how they've been abused. And I mean, I've got a younger brother who's in high school, and last time I spoke to him, he was telling me how he went to a Jewish Holocaust memorial on a school excursion. Now, I'll bet you that young boy couldn't tell you the year that Australia was federated. But what he will be able to tell you is all these horrific stories that he was told by people at that memorial. And it's essentially psychological trauma and abuse is what they're doing to people. They are psychologically traumatizing and abusing young people today with these stories about the Holocaust and all these horrible things that they say that happened. And it is a form of abuse. And that's also something that concerns is when people realize you haven't just been lied to, you've been psychologically traumatized. And a lot of the stories that you were told are completely and utterly fabricated. And when people understand that, when people understand that they're the ones who've been psychologically abused and traumatized, some of them will act out in ways that I don't want to see. And look, we've spent a lot of time on this topic now. It is time for us to move on, but I had to get that piece out there. And again, we provide links to all of this stuff at AusRoundtable.com, so you can go and check the articles for yourself, analyze it for yourself. I'll leave a bunch of links to those films that I spoke about. Spielberg's Hoax, Last Days of the Big Lie, Hellstorm, Hitler, the Greatest Story Never Told. Go and watch them, go and analyze them, look at them objectively for yourself, come to your own conclusions, and I suspect that if you do, you'll come to the same conclusion I have, which is that we have been lied to in a horrific way, and people are waking up to it, people will wake up to it, and let's hope that when they do, we can sort all this out in an orderly fashion. Time to move on to the next topic, and the 8th topic for domestic today, Lindsay, is more vaccine propaganda in the mainstream media. Take it away.
Okay. This was... What triggered it anyway was the Courier Mail on the 12th of May, and the headline was "Child Mumps Case in Low Vaccination Area." And it's just, you know, I've been talking about this for weeks. Every week you seem to have 4 or 5 of these coming through in the Murdoch press. So the quote was, "An unvaccinated child has been diagnosed with a case of highly contagious mumps in northern New South Wales, a region with the country's lowest childhood immunisation rates." End of quote. Now, the article then goes on to talk about the areas with the lowest vaccination rates, which takes in Byron Bay and the areas around there. It is apparently the 15th reported case this year in New South Wales of mumps. Now, to me, that doesn't sound like an outbreak of plague proportions as yet, but the ferals in that, you know, that it's almost like a hippie area, and the ferals can't be seen to be ignoring vaccinations, or where will it end? all the sheep will start jumping over the fence. That's how I view this mentality of the Murdoch press. In connection with this pro-vaccination campaign by the Murdoch press in Australia, it may be well to look into the connections here. It has long been suggested that the press, pharma, PHARMA, and the bankers are connected at the hip. Now, the following goes some way towards showing that, and I've got a couple of links there from The Guardian and a site called Hang the Bankers. And I'll just quote it. That's the best thing. James, the younger son of the media mogul, and then in brackets I've got Rupert Murdoch, for anybody who didn't know who it was, joined Glaxo in 2009 as a non-executive director and sat on its ethics committee. The chairman of the pharmaceutical company was delighted by the man's record in corporate responsibility, but Age of Autism, that must be a site, wrote that within 2 weeks of his appointment, News International had published at least 5 articles attacking the integrity of the MMR, and that's measles, mumps and rubella researcher Andrew Wakefield. The Sunday Times and its journalist Brian Dean accused the researcher of fabricating the data in the 1998 Lancet, which suggested that there is a connection between MMR vaccine and autism. Wakefield was a victim of a smear campaign in the UK, funded by GlaxoSmithKline and aided by the Murdoch media empire. The Sunday Times campaign against Wakefield started in 2003, when section editor Paul Nuki, N-U-K-I, told Dean he needed something big on MMRI. Now, although the roots of this crusade against anti-vaxxers started more than 10 years ago, the timing of the crusade of articles attacking MMR researchers' integrity and James Murdoch's 2009 appointment has been too perfect, some say. James was re-elected to the Glaxo board with 97% of the votes cast, but much has emerged about News Corp and its subsidiaries since. And that was the last quote was from a site called Pharma Gossip. Now, I have another site here from the Telegraph, and it says that GlaxoSmithKline, Britain's largest drug company, has been accused of bribing doctors to prescribe their medicines in Europe, and I think that was in Poland in particular. So I just put that in to give some perspective to this group, GlaxoSmithKline. And I found it quite interesting because we've been talking about this for ages, about just how much propaganda is coming out of the Murdoch press. And, you know, what's driving this? Well, now we know they're connected to the pharma industry. It's not just they're helping some mates, they're actually involved in it. So this is their own propaganda. So I'll throw that back to Ethan because I know he's got an idea on all this.
Yeah, Lindsay, you're right. I'm going to, as I said, I'm trying to incrementally introduce vaccines, and within the next couple of weeks or so is where we get to the agenda, who benefits, who's on the boards, etc., etc. But you can see through this bombardment every single week of pro-vaccine propaganda, you look at who controls the media companies and you see that they have invested stakes within some of these major pharmaceutical corporations. And it's, for most people, if they're new listeners and they don't understand this, or they may have been attracted to the show from some of our vaccine discussions and they don't understand this yet, well, once we put it all out, you will. But for those of our listeners that are familiar with it, it doesn't really come as a surprise. But it's still very important information because this is a very important topic that's still continuing now. Forced vaccinations here in this country, mandatory vaccinations because they're going to take away your family tax benefits and your welfare for those who don't, even though there's a misconception where most of the people who are conscientious objectors aren't even on the welfare system and don't need it in the first place. They're just doing this to crush the poor even poorer. And once you look at who's really behind this, you start to see that there's a very twisted agenda as you go down the rabbit hole. It's not just about free choice at the end of the day. It goes a lot deeper than that, and there's an agenda behind it. But we'll get to that. But I appreciate, Lindsay trying to make those connections between the board members there. And once people wake up and do their own research, it just goes very deep down the rabbit hole, and it gets to a lot of places that we've spoke about on the show, a lot of places that we don't, but it's incredible stuff, and it's very important in this country right now, Johnno.
I was involved in a Skype call with some people from Fakeologists, which is a website which has a lot of live shows I like to listen to, and they generally deal with media fakery, the fake events that are in the news and breaking them down. But they invited me into a live Skype call that they recorded. I imagine they're going to upload that shortly. If they ever do, I'll post the link so people can check that out if they're interested. But I found it was difficult to discuss the topic of vaccination with them because they're North American. They were from Canada, I believe. And they didn't seem to understand what I meant when I was talking about the propaganda about vaccines in this country. I think unless you're in Australia, you don't really understand what we mean when we say that there is a propaganda bombardment going on right now in this country. It is every day. Last week on episode 31 of the ARP, Lindsay listed like 3 or 4 articles that he'd seen in the Courier Mail alone, in that week alone, pushing vaccine nonsense. It is a bombardment, and I found it difficult talking with the North American people. They were lovely people about the vaccine issue because I don't think they appreciated just how immense the propaganda is. And unless you're immersed in it and you're seeing it every day and you're seeing the effect that it has on people, and it is having an effect on people, you better believe that. There's a group in Brisbane who gets together and discuss philosophy once a week or so, right? And the topic for this weekend was vaccinations. And in the debate that they have online before they get together for the big debate, the online discussion, it was just verbatim propaganda. And it wasn't just that vaccines are good. It was that if you don't believe in forced vaccinations, you are harming children. And this angle that they've taken, convincing people that if you're not for forced vaccination, you are harming innocent children. This angle that they've gone for, it's working. Many people are buying it hook, line, and sinker. Lindsay, I'll throw to you.
Yeah. I had another article. I don't know whether we'll get to it or not today, but along the same lines, it really does worry me. This whole concept of if you don't have it, you're a what would you call it? A destroyer of society. And they come out with this herd and various other words that they use to make some sort of an argument that if you don't have it, then you are antisocial or even sociopathic. And it really does worry me. And I think we have to try and put a stop to that as best we can on this small show. But just because what you're saying is correct. They're getting through to more and more of these people. And what happens then? You'll get this huge number of people who every time they do a survey to find out how people feel about it, they'll pick on all these people and yes, we've got to have vaccinations. And I had an incident with my mother, but I won't discuss that here. I'll talk about it later if you like. But it's just it is really like I was going to use Ethan's word of unbelievable because I hadn't been through this process before. And I couldn't believe that this would exactly how it would roll out. So when we get to that, I'll explain what I'm talking about. I think that's about it. I'll throw it to Ethan and see what he's got to say.
Yeah, Lindsay, it is, again, using the correct context, unbelievable stuff. And again, what we said earlier, from the time we started this show to now, it was the end of last year when we started doing this podcast that they were talking about is not vaccinating your children a form of child abuse. And there was a lot of debate going on. I made a video about it saying, no, well, it's about free choice, all right? And as I've said, everyone who I've spoke to who are pro-vaccine, if you want to use that terminology, have said, oh, yeah, when you do think about it, you should have the right to choose what you do with your kid. And the state affairs should not be within our health. You know, this big pharma illusion shouldn't be within our fundamental health rights. But now from then, we've gone to a time where not only are they trying to bring in and will bring in forced vaccinations to, and they've already got it in the childcare centres now. You can't go to childcare in New South Wales, soon to be Queensland, if your child's not vaccinated. Once they bring it into law, not only will it be that you lose benefits, you lose your social status. You lose your friends. It goes beyond a level because you're going to be painted as a criminal, as a terrorist, as someone that's harming children just for wanting to have the fundamental freedom of speech. That's how far we've gone in this country. And every single day in our mainstream press, they are bombarding us with these same notions that we are criminals, that it's to help protect babies, etc., etc. And it's really distressing stuff, Johnno.
And we've got over 60 people watching live, which is a good number. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. In the live chat, Minion1 says that forced vaccinations scare the crap out of me. We should be very worried. And that was one of the issues that I had when I was chatting with these people from Fakeologist on the conference call, was they were saying that talking about the vaccinations and the forced vaccinations to come, that it's just being a fear merchant. You're just being, that's what they said to me, you're being like Alex Jones because all you're doing is scaring people, and that's what the media wants. And I tried to explain to them, you don't understand. People are being scared in this country already, but they're being scared by the TV telling them that there are these evil anti-vaxxers out there who want to harm their kids. So they're already being scared. And what we're trying to say to them is, it's not the anti-vaxxers that you should be scared about. It's the people forcing this propaganda down your throat and what they plan to do once they get forced vaccinations in. And like I said to the people from the Fakeologist group, if you are scared of what I'm saying, well, you don't have to listen. But when an enemy is attacking you, fear of what they will do to you if you don't defend yourself is a natural reaction, and people should be afraid right now of what's going to happen if they don't respond. The good news is that I see more people starting to realize that this vaccination propaganda is statist propaganda. Once people start questioning the state, then they're well on the path to understanding what's really going on. The issue we've got right now is there are so many dumbed down people who never question their state. It doesn't occur to them to question if the government and the media have their best interests at heart, because they just have this faith that the government and media, even though they make mistakes, have their best interest at heart. Their status, they've been trained to be status. But I think this vaccination thing is going to be helping us in a way. More people are going to start questioning the state. They might find their way to shows like ours. And again, we provide links for everything at AusRoundtable.com. You can check it all out for yourself there, including MP3 files of every one of our episodes. We've got to move on to the international topic now, but it follows on perfectly, Lindsay. The first topic for international is to do with Mexico suspending vaccines after lots of deaths. Take it away.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, that does fit in well. Okay, this was in the Courier Mail on page 19 on the 12th of May, and the headline was "Vaccines Suspended." And I'll just quote it. Mexico City, Mexico's public health system has suspended infant vaccines and mounted an investigation after 2 babies died and 29 became ill in an impoverished community in the country's south. The Mexican Institute of Social Security said 6 of the 29 babies were in grave conditions after receiving vaccinations for tuberculosis, rotavirus, and hepatitis B. The cause of the adverse reaction in the babies is not yet known. The Institute said that it had stopped vaccinations nationwide. End of quote. The obvious question is, how did this bit of truth about vaccinations, or anything for that matter, happen to make it into a Murdoch rag? I was astounded when I read the article. We normally only get a teaspoon of truth in 200 litres of hogwash. So I would like to take this opportunity afforded by having read this article to mention my 95-year-old mother's experience this week with the flu vaccine. Now, me being the idiot son and her having had the flu vaccine for 40 years without ever having caught the flu, she ignores me and she sings the praises of vaccines at every opportunity. The fact that she gets pneumonia and bronchitis every second year is irrelevant. She still thinks she never gets the flu. I think it's just all gone down the memory hole. So I don't want to really dump on it too much, but on last Monday, she insisted upon having an injection at the doctor's surgery. On Tuesday morning, she was hobbling about with a very sore right knee. On Wednesday morning, she had an even sorer left knee, a neck, a finger joint was swollen, and she ached all over. Now, I knew it was bad when she could not stand up by herself. She'd sit down at the table to have breakfast, and she couldn't get up. I had to sort of lift her up out of a chair. I knew that was bad because only the Monday before that, when she had the injection, we'd gone to the doctor's surgery, and her house has 12 stairs. So she'd gone up and down the stairs without any problem at all. So then 2 days later, to be able to not stand up from a chair was of a major concern to me. And she suggested that she might have to go into a nursing home, and she was talking about her will being filled out and things like that. And that's most unlike this. She's a fiercely independent woman. So I knew that she must have felt like she could die any minute. So I telephoned the doctor's surgery. The reception immediately defensively assured me that Mum's condition would have nothing whatsoever to do with the vaccination. That was the first thing she said, straight off the bat. I tried to explain how science results are based upon observation of reactions to experiments carried out. You know, that's just the basis of science. Now, there was nothing else out of the ordinary Mum had done. She hadn't that could have caused the symptoms. She hadn't changed the food. She hadn't changed her activities. But I began to feel how the parents of children who show symptoms straight after vaccinations must feel. I don't know whether the receptionists are trained to speak like this, or whether it was just this one woman who did it off her own bat. But it really is quite confronting when somebody said, "Oh no, it couldn't be that." Well, yeah. Now, I stated that my mother was not up to returning to the surgery for examination, and if she didn't improve, I would call an ambulance and take her to casualty. I did, however, insist that my connecting her symptoms with the needle would be noted on her file. Now, then that prompted a conciliatory reply back from the surgery nurse a bit later. So I'm happy to say that my mother is improving slowly, but I would suggest to anyone listening to this podcast that you be very wary of this flu vaccine that they're giving out now. And even if not for yourself, for any relatives you know who are considering it, because it really did knock this elderly woman for six. I'll leave that there and see what you fellas have anything to say about that situation.
Yeah, Lindsay, thanks for sharing that story with us. I think the main thing that I took from it is you know, it's appalling how it's been normalized that stories like this, if you try to connect it to vaccines, or if you try to connect it to the way that the pharmaceutical industry is just based off of interpretations of tests that are peer reviewed, you get demonized, or you get looked at like you're crazy for trying to make those connections together, when we know that most of these vaccines do the complete opposite of what they should do. They destroy the immune system. They have all of these effects on the body that you were trying to avoid in the first place, because there's a difference between vaccination and immunization. Immunization's a natural thing. And that story there just perfectly was a great example, Lindsay, of just, even if it wasn't a direct result of the vaccine itself, even though, you know, you do base that it was, you know, a reaction from that, even if it wasn't, the very notion that you can't question it, the very notion you had to express that it be put onto the file, into the notes, that it could have been a reaction, is just appalling in itself. How we've reached a level where, you know, even in the news, where the Rockhampton baby had an immediate reaction to vaccines, and the medical establishment and the parents didn't believe it was from the vaccines. We're living in scary times, Johnno, where it's just not in this topic. It's the molding of the human subconscious and of the conscious mind is becoming very, very legitimized in worshipping the state. It's statism. It's worshipping in the state and what they believe, and anything that they do say and anything that you do question is out of the ordinary, and that's a scary thing.
It's Aldous Huxley, love your servitude. You know, in the book Brave New World, this is what they talk about: getting the serfs, the peasants, to love their servitude. And anyone who right now loves their government or trusts their government and media after everything they've done and all the things they're doing, that is a slave who loves their servitude. And I don't like to use the term mental illness, because that, you know, I don't believe, I mean, the psychiatry thing is a topic that I've been meaning to discuss for a while, because a lot of it is straight up scam. So I don't really like using their terminology, but if you think of mental illness, just using those words, your mind not being well, if you have faith and trust in the government and media that lie to you the way that they've lied to you so many times, whether it's about war, about medicine, or whatever, if you still love them, then you have a problem with your mind. You haven't worked it out yet. You haven't quite worked out what's really going on. And obviously, we've got, 63 people watching right now. This episode will probably be listened to by hundreds of people by this time next week. That's terrific that we've got these hundreds of people on board. I do wonder, though, sometimes, if there was some way for us to measure it, what percentage of people out there truly trust their government the way that they do? Because if the small sample size of people that I've spoken to here in Brisbane is any indication, it seems to me that the majority of people are genuine statists, and they've got no idea about it. Lindsay, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And we just discussed that about other topics as well. What do you do with these people? I don't have no idea how we get them around. You know, I think you might have been you quoting last time about how it's easier to convince somebody than it is to convince them that they've been lied to or whatever. You know, it's easier to lie to them. Sorry, easier to lie to them to convince them that they've been lied to. And what do you do with these people? I'm not quite sure. We can only really hope to convince those who have got a mindset that's prepared to listen. And I think that's about all you can do. And unfortunately, that just comes down to a few hundred people who have become aware of this podcast. But I think the thing I took away from this was, I thought, how are they ever going to register that this flu vaccine affects people if they will not? They're just completely closed to taking any sort of evidence whatsoever that it has adverse effects. There might be hundreds of thousands of people over Australia who last week and the week before all had adverse reactions to this needle. And yet the manufacturers will be saying, no, there are no adverse reactions. We've not come across any adverse reaction to our needle. And that worries me, that this whole system is breaking down. Well, maybe it's not breaking down. Maybe that's how it's meant to work. But obviously it's breaking down for us, if that makes any sense. That's about all I've got to say, and I'll throw that back to you, Johnno.
Well, Lindsay, I think an aspect of it is that for people who truly believe the government and the media are their friends, if you were to take that away from them, they'd feel alone and defenseless and hopeless, and no human wants to feel that way. So they're more likely to fall in behind a corrupt authority figure than to go it alone and to be their own person. And so I think a community like the one that we're starting to build around this show, I mean, we've got a terrific live chat taking place right now. While you were telling your story about your mother, Lindsay, Trevor Weir, who's a regular listener, said that he really feels for you, brother. And even though you've never met Trevor, we're starting, some of our listeners send terrific correspondence through to us, and we're starting to build a network of like-minded people. And I think the more that we can solidify this network and reach out to people, that they've got something to then come to see, oh, you know, if you realize the government's your enemy, you're not all alone, you're not defenseless. Plenty of other people have worked out already. And look, we're doing live shows like this. We're chatting about it in the live chat during the show. We're starting to build something. People are more likely, once they see that there is this other community that they can be part of, who are all working together to get the information out there, they're more likely to join us than to simply be told, oh, the government's your enemy, and then go away. They need something to join, most people. They don't want to be alone. Whether it's a natural human instinct or it's the way that they've been trained to always need someone above them, that's another debate that you can have. But regardless of whether it's nature or nurture, most people need to feel like there's someone looking out for them. And they'd rather it be a corrupt government than nobody. Well, there are people who are looking out for you and who would look out for you and who would defend you if you would defend them. And they're your fellow citizens. And when you have a real nation, you have real citizens. What we have in this country isn't a real nation anymore. It's been destroyed by many ways, and we've discussed a lot of that on this show. But there are still people out there who care about you. And we would like to think that our listeners would care about each other and would help each other if they ever could. And getting the information out there is the most important step. And once you get the information out to people, if they understand, they can come and take part in a show like this. They can join us on Sunday sessions and talk about it. There are people who care. There are people who listen. There are people who agree with you. You're not crazy. There's a lot of us out there, and we're growing. We've got more chance of getting them across. We've got to move on because we're running out of time very quickly. Topic 2 for today for International is to do with David Cameron's war on the people continuing, Ethan.
Thanks, Johnno. Well, I think that this could put it into context, the way that you just wrapped that up then, about this community that we have, about the strength that we do have, the way that we would look out for one another. And this is a perfect example of someone who is poised to destroy that community, poised to turn our fellow citizens who aren't awake against us. And for those who aren't familiar with the war that David Cameron has declared on the people, I'll get into it after I read the article, but for those who have been aware of his United Nations speech and whatnot, he's back again during this whole electoral process over in the UK at the moment. And this is an article from The Independent on 17th of May. Britain is too tolerant and should interfere more in people's lives, says David Cameron. Quote, Britain is too passively tolerant and should not leave people to live their lives as they please just because they obey the law, David Cameron has said. At the National Security Council today, Mr. Cameron unveiled a series of measures that he said would crack down on people holding a minority extremist view that differed from Britain's consensus. Quote, for too long, we have been a passively tolerant society, saying to our citizens, as long as you obey the law, we will leave you alone, he said. Quote, it's often meant we have stood neutral between different values, and that's helped. to foster a narrative of extremism and grievance. Speaking on BBC Radio 4 today, however, the Home Secretary May said that the tolerance and rule of law were British values. It continues on, and then it goes on to, you know, human rights and the balance, again, as Tony Abbott has said on many occasions, the delicate balance between security and our freedoms. But I just want to, the one thing that I wanted to focus on, before I do that, I'll give some context. David Cameron in his United Nations speech, we covered this on episode 1, I believe it was. That was the irony of starting this show. We started the show directly when they were declaring war on people who were starting shows like this, and we watched it. We watched it before episode 0, Johnno, our test episode. We sat in the lounge room and watched his speech and said, this is what we're up against. And for those who don't know, we'll link at AusRoundtable.com, but David Cameron said we are declaring war on non-violent extremism. Non-violent extremism. You know, a worldview that ISIS and their extremism can foster in, and that includes people that question 9/11. The question that, you know, that think that 9/11 was a Jewish plot, that you know, that the 7/7 bombings were staged, that all Muslims are persecuted, you know, as terrorists, and that's the propaganda that's being pumped out, which it is. But he linked people that think like that to non-violent extremism, linked that to ISIS and the KKK and all of these rhetoric terms, and he said, we need to crack down on non-violent extremism. Now, I've been scripting a documentary about this to talk about, it's going to be called Thought Police, the Death of Global Free Speech. And David Cameron is a main part of this, because this is him. If you break down the speech, he is declaring war on people who question the system, and once they train the people that we're the enemies as well, that people who think an outside view are the same as big bad terrorists, because terrorists can prosper in this world, then we're in trouble. Now, I just want to go over, before I open it into a discussion, his quote again from this speech, this recent speech. For too long, we have been a passively tolerant society, saying to our citizens, as long as you obey the law, we will leave you alone. It's often meant that we have stood neutral between different values, and that's helped foster a narrative of extremism and grievance. This government will conclusively turn the page on this failed approach. So, because they've stood alone and said, as long as you obey the law, you can have different values. Having different values has fostered extremism. Having different values. We have different values from a lot of people. We don't believe the government's there to protect us. We don't see that the government's a parent authority. We obey the law still? We are still law-abiding citizens. Does this mean that we're the enemy? I just wanted to bring this up because this is so vitally important, because it's quotes like this that will be, hopefully, in the rewritten history books that we establish once we win, saying, here's the people that declared war on us, look what they said. And if we don't identify this now, Johnno, then one day we could wake up and it could be too late.
Yeah, well, how do you respond to that? A lot of our listeners might not be aware, Ethan, that we were thinking of calling this show, before we went with the Australian Roundtable Podcast, we were thinking of calling it the Non-Violent Extremists.
Yeah.
And I personally still prefer that title, but I deferred to the collective majority and we went with the Australian Roundtable Podcast. But I am a non-violent extremist, actually. I'm proudly a non-violent extremist. I'm non-violent in the sense that so long as I'm not being attacked, I don't attack anybody. And I'm an extremist in the sense that I'm extremely interested in the truth and looking for it and talking about it and discussing it. And I'm extremely agitated by anyone who's destroying this country, which includes our government. So yeah, if that makes me an extremist, that I don't like our government, I think they're corrupt, I think it could be much better, then call me an extremist and I am non-violent. This idea that they want to demonize non-violent extremists, it was ridiculous at the time, and we've seen here 6-7 months later exactly where he's headed with this. He just won an election in England. So Tories just won again. So they've got another 3 or 4 years, whatever it is, in their electoral cycle. And this is what he starts off with by saying this, that so long as you haven't broken any laws, we've left you alone. Well, not anymore. Yeah. I mean, how much more blatant does it have to be? Lindsay, you've been around a lot longer than I have, so maybe you're taking this all in your stride, but what do you think about all of this?
No, I was taken quite aback when Ethan was reading it out. I thought, this bloke's a nutcase. And it really does concern me that the British people have elected him again. You start to wonder what's going on. This is a great nation that started with common law and brought this whole system that we use of justice and fairness for everybody. And the leader now is setting out to destroy it, and they vote him back in again. I was just gobsmacked when you were reading it. So there's very little I can say about it. I think he's a bloody nutcase. It's got me concerned that somebody hasn't bumped him off. That's just when you take it to its extreme of what he's saying. Nobody in Britain is safe anymore. It really is quite an outrageous thing to say. It probably didn't sound it, to some people, but to me, I'm extrapolating it and thinking, right, where does he go from here and what's going to happen? And it really is. He's declaring war on his people. I'm quite shocked. I'll hand it back to you, Ethan, and see if you've got a reply to what I've just said.
Yeah, it's extremely shocking stuff, Lindsay, and I've got the quote on my computer in front of me, and when you actually look at it in the text, it really, it really puts it in perspective, and he ends the quote with, "This government will conclusively turn the page on this failed approach. Going into the next 3 years, they're going to turn the page on if you've obeyed the law, but you've had different values from the state, we'll leave you alone. Now, if you have different values from the state, and you still obey the law, you're not going to be left alone. That's a failed approach, and we're going to end that." So once we tell the public that you're evil anti-vaxxers or whatever, that they already see that we're enemies through these incremental processes, through these individualized things like fluoride and vaccine and these stereotypes like tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists, and he's said in his speeches, anyone that thinks that 9/11 was a Jewish plot, anyone that thinks that 7/7 bombings were staged is a non-violent extremist. Now, if you have values like that, and even if you obey the law, you're in trouble because we're declaring war on you. This is it. We've been re-elected. We're coming for you now. It's extremely concerning stuff. And in a week where we've had biosecurity laws that can round us up, new CCTV, B-1 bombers coming to Australia and Darwin, all of this stuff that's happening this week, they are really ramping up, Johnno, the info war, the name that it is an information war, is really getting to a point where we need to do something. And I hate to always be negative. I'm always for solutions, and I'm always for solutions and how we can get out of this and that we will win. I still do believe we will win. But we're at a time where even 2 years ago I didn't think we'd get to. I always saw it in my head. They'll get to this eventually. Now we're at that point. This is them saying, we're coming after you. This is the beginning stages. Incrementally it's going to happen, but we will get there. And if we don't address it now, then
I do have very different values to the government, Ethan, and I'll give you a few examples. The government, and ours is just like the British government in a sense, one of the government's values is that it's okay to go and bomb little brown people in the Middle East for whatever purposes they're doing that. I don't think it's okay to go and bomb people in the Middle East, personally. The government thinks it's okay to flood us with people who don't come from our culture, many of them can't even speak English. I don't think it's okay to flood us with 250,000 immigrants every year. The government thinks that it's okay to imprison you for having the temerity to grow your own medicine. I don't believe it's okay to imprison people for growing their own medicine. That's just 3 examples of how I vehemently disagree with the values of this government. And any sane person would. And for them to come out and say, you have to have the same values as us or we're coming after you, and to say it as blatantly as Cameron did, if people don't start waking up now, they're never going to wake up. And in the live chat, we've got over 60 people watching live. In the live chat, they've been discussing how many people are going to make it. Like if we do manage to fix things up, and I believe that we will, how many people are actually going to make it? Sadly, a lot of people won't. A lot of people will not wake up. And in tonight in Sunday sessions, we're talking about Yuri Bezmenov, the KGB defector, who 30 years ago gave an interview where he stated, what happens is the communists, they demoralize a nation. Your country, America, you've already gone through the process of demoralization where we ruin people's minds. And it takes 15 to 20 years to do that, to train a generation of people to destroy their minds. But once it's done, you can't undo it. And he said that these people, he called them the leftist professors at university, the sociology professors, those kinds of people, the ones who are interested in what they call social justice warriors who are trying to destroy the values of the nation. He said with those people, as soon as the communists get full control, the Leninist Marxists get full control, those professors are the first ones up against the wall because they believe in this idealism that by campaigning for what they campaign for, everything's going to get better. They believe in progress, that we're progressing to something better. And once the evil cabal has full control of the country, they're the first people that have to go because they're going to realize all of their idealism was false idealism. But they will not realize up until the day that they get a kick in the bum That's what he said.
Yeah.
You can't change their minds. No evidence will change their minds. He says that's the great tragedy of the thing. Once you destroy somebody's mind with fake education for 15 to 20 years, very few of those people are ever going to wake up. That's the sad reality. And it's one of the saddest aspects of going through the process of what I call deprogramming. Whether it's waking up or deprogramming, is realizing that many people who you love and care about, they're never ever going to wake up. They will march themselves into a gulag before they'll wake up and realize the government and the media isn't their friends. And that's just the sad reality. And as sad as that is, there's an upshoot to it. When you find other people who know what's really going on, you can form true relationships, true friendships, and truly form the common bonds that humans are meant to have with each other, because you two realize that you're out for each other. You're not going to defer to some government. If you meet someone and they say, yep, I would support the government coming and taking you away if you had Ebola, that person isn't your friend and never really could be, because they've got a higher order preference, and that's the state. They're a statist. They can't really be your friend if they would sell you out to the government because the government's claiming you've got Ebola. That's the sad reality. It's not a reality that people want to hear or want to deal with, but it is the reality. If that person would sell you out to the government because the government says that you might have Ebola and you're a threat, that person can't really be your friend. But in this community, the kind of network that we're trying to build here and that I think we are building here, and the live chat I think proves that we're starting to build here, these can be real friends because they'll put you and your health and your family ahead of any propaganda the government might chuck at you. And that's what it's all about. Now, we are going to run a little bit over time, but there's one more topic we have to discuss today, and that was to do with the Vatican recognizing the State of Palestine. Ethan, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Johnno. I'll just make this quick because I just wanted to do it as a catalyst for to speak about some of these agendas at hand. But this is again from the Independent. It says Vatican recognizes State of Palestine. Does this mean Israel is becoming more isolated on the world stage? Quote, on Wednesday, the Vatican finalized a treaty that made clear that the Holy See officially recognizes the State of Palestine rather than the Palestine Liberation Organization, the institution that represents Palestinians overseas in countries that don't recognize the distinct Palestinian state. According to the Associated Press, the process of negotiations over the treaty had initially begun with the PLO, but switched in designation now, and it constitutes an official recognition of the Palestinian state. The treaty's ratification is expected to be a formality. Quote, yes, it is a recognition that the state exists, said the Reverend Lombardi, the Vatican spokesman. The move should not be too great a surprise since the UN General Assembly voted to recognize Palestine as a non-member observer state in 2012. The Vatican was referred to the State of Palestine in its speeches, and when Pope Francis visited the Holy Land last year, the official Vatican program referred to the Palestinian Authority, President Abbas, as the leader of the State of Palestine. And it goes on to continue to speak about how the Pope has called Abbas a angel of peace, I believe it was. Don't quote me directly from that. I'm just going off the top of my head. But this was another stunning development this week, and the reason I wanted to bring it up was because when we talk about who controls the world, or when we talk about where does this agenda end, we talk about it a lot on Sunday sessions. A lot of names come up, the Vatican, there's the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Vatican, the Committee of 300, the Zionist lobby. A lot of things come up, and to see that the Vatican officially recognizes the State of Palestine and that there's backlash from Israel tends to open up a discussion point. Lindsay, I'll throw it first over to you. It opens up a discussion point, whereas on the global scale of things, what does this mean for the power grid? Does this mean that there are conflicts? Does this mean that who's in control? This was mainly a point that I wanted to get across, just to open a general discussion about your thoughts on, firstly, the Vatican recognizing the State of Palestine and how that plays into the global agenda, Lindsay.
Okay, I've got a mixed feeling on this. I remember a few years ago seeing a photograph of the previous Pope with a group of rabbis, and the rabbis were pointing at him, and he had this, when you read body language, he had this sort of submissive look about him, and it just said to me that these Jews have got it all over him. Now, I find it something, whether it's a new Pope who's throwing off the yoke or what's going on, I don't know. But I'm quite surprised by that. because I know up until then there'd been a Vatican thing about, you know, the Jews are the killers of Christ and all that sort of stuff, and then the last, I think it was the previous one or two popes had caved into the Jews and no, we're going to get rid of all that nonsense. We're your best friends now, and they did look submissive. This is a new thing, and I'm not sure how to read into it. So I'll have to have a think about this before I make any definitive statement if I can. Okay, I'll throw it back to Johnno and see what he's got to say on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the reasons Ethan wanted to finish off with this topic was so we could get into that broader discussion about the control grid and who's really at the top. And many people say it's the Jesuits or it's the Vatican. Some people say it's the Zionists or the Jews. Other people say that it's the Fourth Reich of Nazi Germany. I mean, there are different people out there with different notions of who's really at the top. But there is that saying, it's attributed to Voltaire. I think it's misattributed to him, but it's a truism no matter who said it, which is to know who rules over you, work out who you can't criticize. And I did a video on the John LeBon channel recently looking at the fact that in Canada, they're discussing passing laws or enacting policies that will make it a hate crime to want to boycott Israel or to campaign for boycotting Israel. Hate speech for saying that you think people should boycott a country. Now, whether or not there are good reasons to want to boycott Israel, even if you think, I mean, if I said to you I wanted to boycott New Zealand, that's not hate speech. That's not, I mean, that's ridiculous, right? If I said that I wanted to boycott McDonald's, if I said I wanted to boycott this country, this corporation, that corporation, whatever, how can anyone claim that that's hate speech? It's ridiculous. But that's exactly what's happening today, and you have to ask the question, why? I mean, how far does this have to go before people start to wake up that regardless of where they sit in that total control grid, the State of Israel and the people behind the State of Israel have far too much power, and it's not power that's ever going to be wielded in your benefit. What say you?
Yeah, Lindsay, sorry. End of the episode, my mind's all over the place, and I really wanted to make this an important topic. For me, it was if we establish those you can't criticize, we know that the Vatican does have power. It has a lot of power and influence on the world affairs. You know, within institutionalized power over a number of years. It's been woven into the fabric of society. The Vatican's power. But if there's someone above them, say it is Israel, for example, and the Vatican is coming out in complete defiance of that, what does that say about the global stage? And that's what the article asked: is Israel becoming more isolated on the global stage? Where will that lead to? It is a big discussion, as Lindsay said. I don't want to make a definitive answer on what I believe about it, but it was just a very interesting thing that I thought I'd let the viewers or the readers or the listeners who are checking it out on either website that we broadcast this through to analyze for themselves and try to make conclusions for themselves, because it's an interesting development when you look at it at the global scale of things. And that's all I wanted to bring up, was just some food for thought to finish the episode off there, Johnno.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd love to get into a discussion about that, and I say that we discuss it more on Sunday sessions later on this evening. I'll give you the final thought on the topic, because we do have to wrap this show up. We'll discuss this more next week in a future episode, because it's very important. Even if we can't identify who's really at the top of the power grid, we can identify some people who are higher up and are using their power, who are using their power for purposes that don't help us, and it's worth discussing that, because it's one thing to talk about all the symptoms. It's very important to talk about the cause, the root problems, and we'll be discussing all of that and more on next week's episode and into the future. But we've got to wrap this one up, Ethan, so I'll give you the final thought on that topic.
Yeah, it's just for people to just interpret it themselves. That's the main thing that the mainstream media doesn't do, allow you to make up your own mind. All I wanted to do was present the information. Hell, it could be a complete distraction, or the Vatican could just be in with the power grid and they've just said this, recognizing the state of, Palestine, maybe it'll take some heat off of blah, 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 blah. Could all just be completely false. It could be anything. It could be a number of things, and I haven't made my mind up, but just the notion that the information is out there, I encourage just everyone to take that and do your own research, interpret it for yourself, and make your own decisions at the end of the day, Johnny.
That's what people should be doing, is analysing the information for themselves, looking at all of the sides of the debate, and then making up their own minds, not based on what everyone else is telling them they have to think, but on what makes most sense to them. Weigh up the information for yourself, analyse it for yourself, and come to your own decision. And earlier in the night, Greg Williams, one of our commenters, said that what's happening in society today is like the ASH experiments on a mass scale. And of course, the ASH experiments, I'm sure most of our listeners are familiar with it. I talk about it all the time. If you're not familiar with the ASH experiments, ASCH, you need to familiarise yourself with these experiments. Basically what they found was that if you put a person in a room and give them a simple test, they will lie or they will even missee what they're supposed to see based on the false consensus that everyone else gives them. And the reason why this is illuminating is because it shows us that we are, to a large extent, herd-like in our psychology sometimes, herd psychology. We will just go with the herd sometimes, and sometimes we don't even realize that we're doing it. Once you understand the ASH experiments, you can start spending more time trying to deprogram yourself and think to yourself, what are the things that I've just gone along with for my whole life because I've never thought to question because no one else questions them. Those are the things that we should be questioning. These are the ASH experiments. I'll post a link on AusRoundtable.com to that video for those who aren't familiar with it. You need to familiarize yourself with the ASH experiments because we see it every day in this country, and that's what the false consensus is all about on the mainstream media. False consensus, make you think that if you think differently, you're the crazy one. When, for all you know, there are other people out there who think the way that you do, and on this show we like to think that most of our listeners, even though we all have different views on a whole range of topics, there are a few things that most of us agree on, and one of them is you have to make up your own mind when you've seen all of the evidence, and the TV and school is not going to give you anywhere close to all of the evidence. They're going to give you a very narrow line of evidence and hope that you'll believe that and never do any more of your own research. But I'm starting to ramble. We're getting towards the end of the episode, so it's time to wrap it up. Lindsay, I think we've had a terrific episode so far. From the live chat, Paul Owens asked us, have we done any episodes that deal with Brendan O'Connell? Yes, episode 16, where we were fortunate enough to have with us as a guest Jeff C, back before the whole TransAsia event thing. We discussed censorship in this country, and we looked at three people. We looked at Frederick Tobin, who was imprisoned for a few months for having a website where he questions certain aspects of World War II. That's all he did, a website where he questions what we're told about war. And we all know that war is written by the victors. The war history is written by the victors. We know how much propaganda there is in war. Only a moron would think that everything that they've been told about World War II is true. Only a moron could possibly think that. And all he was doing was saying, I question certain aspects of World War II history. He got put in prison for that in this country. So we discussed Frederick Tobin. We also discussed Brendan O'Connell, who spent a couple of years in jail for having the temerity to say that he thinks that Judaism is a religion of death and violence. Because he said that, and this is all, you can find this on YouTube if you're not familiar with it, because he said that, he found himself in prison for 2 years. We get told every day about Muslim hate preachers and ISIS, the death cult, and how evil the Muslims can be. But a man says that he thinks that and Christianity is criticized every day, everywhere, all over the TVs. It's completely mocked and ridiculed and everything. But this man decided to say that he thinks that Judaism is a death cult. I think he might have used the term death cult or something like that. Wound up in jail for a couple of years in this country. And most people have no idea about it. And why would they know about it? You know what I mean? So we discussed Tobin, we discussed O'Connell, and we also discussed one of the characters from the Sydney Morning Herald from the Fairfax publications who lost his job for criticising Israel, essentially. Oh. So we looked at those three people. Episode 16 is, to this day, it's still one of my favourite episodes of the show. I thought it was terrific. Go and check it out. AusRoundtable.com. We've got all of the episodes in MP3 format for you to download for free. So you can listen to it as an MP3 file, or you can check out the video on YouTube. It's all there for you. We provide all the links to all of our information, so you can check this out for yourself and see. I'm not joking. A guy got put in prison for a couple of years for criticising Judaism, and that alone should tell you plenty about what's going on in this country today. So Paul Owens, check out episode 16, AusRoundtable.com. But Lindsay, it is time to wrap up the show. We've gone a bit over time. Final thoughts for episode 32 of the ARP?
No, I thought it was a good show. I am concerned about this Cameron business. Because I can see our bloke here, Abbott, adopting that same sort of attitude. So it's a good show, and it's brought up a number of topics, a number of principles that I think are of concern, and it gives us somewhere to look towards the future. So I think it's been good. It's concerning, but it's good. Okay, I think that sums it up for me. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay, again for joining us. It's been great as always. I think this was a very important episode, in my opinion, for Final Thoughts. It was important because for me, this time is a crossroads for me in terms of where I see things going. And for all of this to happen with all in the 1 week, that was a sign. I think it was one of our most important episodes. I think it was one of our best episodes in terms of the content that we got through. And this is episode 32. It's double the episode that we did with Jeff C, which was an equally important episode where the people we're criticising today, it was the first time that we actually took that leap to start criticising and to start questioning down the rabbit hole a bit more. And now, double those episodes later, and we've got David Cameron, we've got all these agendas coming down with the hammer on us. So it's never been a better time to get involved, to get involved in the community, start your own podcast. This is go time. We've got the power in our hands. We've already won. They just make us believe that we haven't won. Once we all realise we've already won. Once we realise that it's a house of cards and we can just move out from underneath of it, that's what they're afraid of doing. They want us to focus on the negative aspects and not try to empower you with solutions and not try to empower you with the positive aspects, and that is that we have already won and we can continue to win, and it only takes a small minority of us, of the critical mass, to do it, Jono. And that's the final note that I wanted to leave on. Even though there was a lot of dark, negative things in this episode, at the end of the day, we need to look at the positive side and radiate positivity, because radiating positivity can change the world, John.
Yeah, I'm glad you say that. I mean, I spoke earlier about the fact that it's my opinion that a lot of people aren't going to make it to the other side, if I can just couch it in those terms. And in the live chat, we've still got 60 people watching right now. In the live chat, Red Siren said that I think they were referring to me that what I had said had made them sad when I'm talking about, hey, there are people who you love and care about who would never wake up even as they were marching to a gulag. And yeah, that is a depressing thing when you first get your head around it. Of course it is. And you mentioned earlier in the show, Ethan, that you think that this is almost like a test. You know, who can make it through this messed up world and not go crazy? Those who do, they're the ones who are passing the test. Sometimes that's how I think about it as well. And I'd say to those people who think that what I'm saying can sound sad or depressing, it only is insofar as you let it be. I would argue that truth is power, knowledge is power, and that once you understand these things, you're better equipped to deal with them. And that's what we're trying to do with this show, is to deal with them. We've got the live chat people talking about these things. We are starting to build something here, and yes, it all seems small now, but a bucket fills with the first drop. There is a point, it doesn't matter how destined that bucket is to be filled with water, there's a point where there's just a single drop in there. There's some stage where there's almost nothing in that bucket, and eventually the bucket gets filled, and shows like this, I think, can be the start of starting to fill that bucket, getting the information out there, because once the information is out there, once people understand, once enough people understand what's going on, you'll see it snowball, and it always starts off slow. So take, you know, don't let it get you down, okay? It will get you down for a bit, that's natural, but don't let it keep getting you down. Bounce back the next day, you're better off for the knowledge. That's my argument to you, and the listeners can let us know underneath this video on YouTube whether they agree or disagree. I'm more than open to seeing what people have to say about that. Time for the final thoughts now. Trevor Weir in the live chat said that he thinks that we should make a flyer that he could start posting out. Trevor Weir, thank you so much for the suggestion. I've been thinking about this myself, Ethan, what we can do if listeners want to support us. What can they do to help us? And I think that would be terrific. You and I should work on a flyer that if people want to, they can just print out a few and post it around. And the best way for people to help us, we've had plenty of people offer to donate us money, and that means so much to me that they would offer that. That's terrific. And another way you could help that wouldn't cost you anything is just talking about the show in online forums. Places like Reddit in Australia, the biggest internet forum that I'm aware of is called Whirlpool. There are a bunch of other internet forums that are huge as well. Most of them have general discussion on news sections. You only need to post a link to our show here or there, and that'll oftentimes get hundreds, sometimes thousands of views, the link. Anyone who clicks through to that will listen to us. Now, some of them will listen to us and will be so different to what they're used to that they'll instantly click away. But I'm not really doing this show to try and wake people up. I'm doing this show as a place where people who already have some idea, who are already questioning, can get together, listen. Those people who are already questioning things, when they get exposed to this show, they might become new listeners. So if you want to help us, places like Reddit, places like Whirlpool, internet forums, don't be afraid to register there. You can register anonymously. You just need an email account, and then just post links to our shows. And the worst that can happen is they might delete the post. That's the worst that can happen to you, and it won't cost you a cent. And that kind of thing can get the message out there a lot quicker. So if you want to help us, we'll get those flyers put together, Ethan. People can post them out. That's terrific if you want to do that. But if you want to help just from the comfort of your lounge room, just post links to our episodes every now and then. And it could be as easy as, suppose we do a segment on vaccinations, for argument's sake. We post a timestamp to that underneath our video on YouTube, so you can link directly to that segment. So they don't have to listen to the whole thing. So you might see an online discussion on Reddit talking about the crazy anti-vaxxers harming children. And you might get on there and just post a comment, well, there is another perspective. What do you think of what these guys have to say? Post a link. It's as easy as that. And that might seem like such a small, simple thing, because it is a small, simple thing, but you'd be amazed at the effect that that can have just by getting that post there, getting people to click there. Who knows what could happen. So if you want to help out, that's a good suggestion that I think you should check out. Another thing I want to mention is my channel, John the Bond. I finally started making videos, Ethan. It's taken me a long time to get off my, to start doing them, but I've got some videos out there. If you haven't seen them, I've done videos on the Nepal earthquake, forced vaccination laws that we've discussed today, the violence against women, propaganda in the media, the Canadian government talking about making it hate speech to criticize Israel. Antarctica is freezing due to global warming. A whole bunch of nonsense that I've been addressing in some of these videos, and if you're not already familiar with them, go and check them out. Some of them are 12, 30 minutes long, some of them are 29, 30 minutes long, but by using the videos, Ethan, I can sort of leave this show more for you and Lindsay to get your content in, because I've got so much content I want to talk about that there's just not enough time. So the videos are an outlet for me to discuss these things. And if people are interested in them, check those videos out. And of course, stick around for the Q&A. For live listeners, we're going to a Q&A after the show. But if you're just here for the official upload, we're going to wrap the show up right now. So I want to say thank you for joining us on episode 32 of the Australian Roundtable Podcast on the 17th of May, 2015. We'll be back at 3 p.m. next week for episode 34A. See you then.